Hey Barry. Hey Barry. I just
Hello.
woke up like 1 minute ago, so give me a few seconds here.
Yeah, take your time. I just installed the latest update of Zoom, and the interface is just a little bit different. So it took me an extra couple of seconds to get to the right button here.
So I'm gonna make you a host here.
All right. I think Sam said he was going to be on the road and might not be able to connect during this time period.
Okay.
He had to travel, I think, a couple hours someplace, he said this morning.
Interesting. I haven't seen him travel very much other than for like workshops.
Yeah, I didn't bother to, make a clear mental note of the details, only just recalled that he said he was going to be on the road.
Mhm.
I've learned not to try to not to try to be Sherlock Holmes and remember all these teensy weensy details as if they really mattered. I don't have that much RAM memory upstairs anymore.
I wanted to talk to you about obsidian, but I'll be right back. I'll be back in
Okay,
like
take your time.
you can let people in while I get ready.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye out for new peoples.
Okay. I have now done my bathroom bit. Now I'm getting dressed.
Okay. Should I look up Obsidian? I suppose it's the name of some piece of software or something, but I don't know what it is. Should I go ahead and search it first?
It is a note-taking system. It's also a personal knowledge management system that I've been experimenting with for the last 2 weeks.
It's new then.
Well, it's relatively new, like 2, 3, 4 years old, something like that.
Oh, that's not that new. Yeah, my problem is that my own work is too obscure to be indexed anymore by Google. It used to be. They used to index the blogs and things, and even Facebook, at the beginning, but now they don't index, the kind of stuff at my level of authorship. And I can no longer go out and say, where did I write, XYZ, 10 years ago, and it doesn't know anymore.
So it wouldn't be that difficult for you to index it, right?
Well, provided I could have somebody find it for me where I originally did put it. And I mean, I know some things that are on, like I know my 4 blogs and my personal website.
Right.
But if it's on Facebook or some other social network, I'd be hard pressed to be able to find it.
Facebook search is horrible.
It's awful.
Yeah.
I mean, if it was a post on my own timeline, that's not too bad. If it was in a comment on somebody else's timeline, forget it. You ain't gonna find it. Or if it was in a group that got kicked out of.
Well, even posts on my own timeline, sometimes I have difficulty finding.
Yeah, you have to be really careful with the search terms. If you don't have exactly the right specificity of a search term, you'll end up getting everything but what you're looking for. And that's the problem, is that I don't always remember exactly how I phrased something.
So I dropped off when you and Josh started going. I was only coincidentally in the room when you and Josh signed off. So
Yeah, we didn't talk that long. I think maybe 10 minutes or something like that.
just
And it
something
was,
about Chat GPT. Was that what you guys were mostly focused on?
see if I can even remember now. Maybe if I pause a minute, I can recollect what was in that passage. But we didn't get very far into anything because basically he had to look after Aya, because she was up and about and demanding attention. So we did. There was something he wanted. There was something he wants to have an in-depth conversation with me about, and we said we should plan a time to do that. But now, off the top of my head, I can't remember what the topic of the in-depth conversation was that he has in mind.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he alluded to it, but again, I don't have a tape recorder up here, and that's the problem. If I'm not taking notes, which I'm not, then I will lose that kind of detail.
Okay, I'm gonna try something here. Then what you're gonna see is not very impressive because I haven't learned to use it very well yet. But I'll show you the basics of it, and then over time I'll get more familiar with the cool stuff in it. Oh, wait. Before I show you, here's the thing it does. It does not push your data into the cloud if you don't want it to. In other words, it provides a cloud-based storage and synchronization service for your personal knowledge, but you don't have to use it. In other words, all the knowledge resides locally, and you can decide optionally whether you want or not to push it someplace.
Yeah, so that means if your hard drive crashes or your antique machine crashes, you're screwed.
No, there are other synchronization services. You do not have to use theirs. So you can use OneDrive, you can use Google Drive, you can use GitHub, you can use a number of different facilities. You don't have to use theirs.
Provided you have paid for enough storage in the cloud. Because most cloud storage is like limited to nominally 5 gigs, which isn't very much anymore.
But you don't even have to do that. You can do it across your own servers, at your own home. You don't need to use anybody's. Okay.
Yeah, what I need to do, I do actually have one old Synology that does have a couple of big drives on it, including what's the name of this backup drive technology where it has striped copies? What the hell is that called anymore?
RAID.
RAID, yeah. I do have one RAID-based Synology that I could, if I would get around to figuring out how to set it up, use that as actually I have 2 devices. I have 2 RAID systems. But I haven't really bothered to back stuff up on it because mostly I've been putting my stuff up to the cloud anyway. Except that now I can't find a lot of it because it doesn't no longer indexes blogs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. So another characteristic of it is it's using what I call the modern day version of ASCII.
Meaning,
So, do you recall? I think we've had this conversation before. You recall ASCII, yes?
sure. Well, ASCII is still used, and then there's the I don't know what they call this feature where you can have the extended ASCII with the with the funky characters. What the hell's that called?
Code?
Unicode, yeah. So it's ASCII then ASCII with Unicode.
Right. So rather than ASCII text, which was really easy, and in Unix, the whole point was every utility can be a filter for ASCII or any other kind of ASCII-based data, right?
Yeah.
So in my view, the modern day version of ASCII is Markdown.
Markdown.
Do you know
I've heard the
Markdown?
word, but I'm not sure what markdown means.
Okay. Markdown is basically just a few very, very like 5 or 6 simple things added to ASCII text. In other words, a hash means it's a header. 2 hashes means it's a second level header. 3 hashes means it's a third level header, etc., all the way down to 6. Okay, so we can have 6 levels of headers indicated by hash signs.
So for like an outline format.
Exactly. And the dash in the first position means a bulleted item.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this word gets a little bit funky. Sometimes 2 dashes means a sub bullet, so a second level bullet. Other markdown languages take an indented dash as a sub bullet. Okay, so anyway, this version takes an indented dash, indented by 2 spaces, as a sub bullet.
Okay, so it's a deal for outline. Yeah, because for example, on my Macintosh, I can have a hyphen, a mathematical minus, or an M dash. And there are 3 different symbols that have slightly different lengths. And I tend to use the middle one, sort of the minus sign length of the horizontal dash, when I want to prefix something where I can't use a bullet because I already used a bullet for something else at a higher level.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to hit option minus sign to get the intermediate one.
Right. Which means you don't have ASCII anymore. You've got some character that's somewhere in some Unicode table.
Exactly.
And that's why I really hate. In fact, when Macintosh Word or Microsoft Word came out, I was horrified. That's the closest I've actually been in my life to being horrified by some technology, because it meant that this format was now completely proprietary.
Yeah, that
Unix notion of all data, you're working for all utilities and all programs, was completely blown. They had no understanding of that philosophical computational principle.
this drives me crazy between the Macintosh codes for Unicode and the Windows codes for Unicode. And since I normally use the Macintosh,
Code pages, what a fucking horrible concept. Code pages. God,
yeah.
yeah.
For example, if I want to use the symbol for 3/4, good luck trying to find how to write, how to hit some key combination that means 3/4 is one character.
You always have to do a Google search and then cut and paste from it,
Yeah, I do have a thing in the Macintosh edit window.
So you have a keyboard option, right? You can bring
no, it's different. There's something called emoji and symbols that's in the edit window, at least on almost every window in Macintosh, and it brings up a little thing where you can try to find symbols. But if I want to search for 3/4, I don't know what to search on, because if you can only put in like one letter in the search, like what's the one letter I'm going to put in that I'm trying to find 3/4?
So anyway, Markdown introduces a few other things, but one other cool thing is it can do links. So if you put text between square brackets and follow it immediately by a URL in round brackets, that's a link. So the square bracket text shows as readable, and then if you click it, it goes to the URL that's in the round bracket.
Zulip uses that notation.
Exactly. Zulip uses that form of Markdown as well. Okay.
If I can only remember which format is used by which application. The trouble is that they vary from one.
Actually, Markdown is becoming a standard. So that's what's cool about Markdown. Okay. So the other thing it understands is hash marks indicating topics.
Indentation. Yeah, because you can't do indentation on Facebook.
No. These are hash indicating like these what do you call them? Flags? No,
hash marks.
Yeah, but there's a special term for it. God, I do this all the time. Why do I forget what it is? Anyway, if you say hash mark to do and click on it, it shows you all the to dos in your entire system. Okay.
Oh, I see.
Mark, waiting, which I use. Okay. Because I have action items which I then delegate, and now I'm waiting for those. Okay,
so it's a search token. It is a known search token.
No. You define it yourself. Okay, so you can define as many of these as you want.
Oh, I see. So you take a search string and you boil it down to a search token that's
Yeah, God, there's a stupid special word for it. I know this. I use it every day, and then for right now, for some reason, it escapes me.
well, the whole
Anyway,
notion of tokens. Go ahead.
those are the basics of Markdown. If you understand that, you understand Markdown. Okay.
I get the idea, yeah, just not the details.
Yeah. So I can give you a little. I want to show you. I'll show you. Okay. But anyway, given that the basic structure is Markdown. Oh, by the way, it also includes pasted images. Okay. So it creates links to pasted images, and so it understands that.
Oh.
Okay, so anyway, those are the elements of Markdown. Using those elements, you can create your own personal knowledge management system. You know, Markdown is not great for writing books, but it's sufficient for structuring notes and knowledge.
Yeah, okay. So
All right. So anyway, then it indexes everything. And it knows about all your links. And here's the cool thing. If you move files around and restructure them in your folder hierarchy, or you move them around, or you read, all those links automatically update. So they keep backlinks as well. Okay, so
it knows where it got. So it knows where it got it from.
No. In your entire system.
Oh, I see.
Your entire system, links and backlinks are kept automatically synced. So if you move things into a subdirectory, or you move it to a different thing, or if you move it, 2 levels up or whatever, or 2 levels down, all those links remain accurate. That's a cool thing. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And then also links outside your system, of course, still point outside, and it doesn't do any it doesn't do any synchronization with those.
But that's the problem, is that stuff gets moved around in the outside world, and
that
you know where you got it originally, but that place doesn't exist no more.
That problem, by the way, Barry, if it had been solved on day one, the internet would be like 1/1000th the size it is today. I think that mistake and that omission allowed the internet to grow. It really did. Because if you required that links stay completely synchronized, internet would never have grown the way it did.
Yeah, I mean, I go to the Wayback Machine.
Yep.
And the Wayback Machine used to be fabulous.
By the way, I used to visit them, by the way, in San Francisco, archive.org.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I've got some content up there.
It used to be fabulous, but 2 things happen. One is that it doesn't always index everything, or the place where it indexed it has changed, and it doesn't know that.
Yep.
And what's the other issue? Oh, the other issue is there's some legal. They're under some kind of legal stress because of copyright.
Yeah.
They're I don't know how bad the potential lawsuits are, but there's some copyright lawsuits.
Google should be under stress. Microsoft should be under stress if they're being sued by copyright.
But the thing is that the Wayback Machine doesn't have the kind of deep pockets that Microsoft and Google have.
That is correct. That's why they're being sued out of existence, and Microsoft and Google are not.
Now, the only thing that would make sense is that if this is going to be a general decision using the Internet Archive as the exemplary, then Google and Microsoft might want to go in and be friend of the court and say, no, don't do that, because that's going to automatically carry over to us. But right. I don't know if they're helping. What's the guy's name? I forget his name.
Let's see. The guy who did D3950. What was his name?
It doesn't matter. Anyway, the guy who does the Wayback Machine is basically one guy.
Yeah, his name is B something or other, I think.
That's again, it's a detail that I don't bother to memorize because I hardly ever would use.
You've memorized lots of other details, but
the thing, I try to memorize details that have a long longevity worth having. But things which are kind of ephemeral and transient and unlikely to come up again. And the thing is, I don't have a good cache memory. See, if you have a cache memory so that it kind of evaporates, after a month or two, but I don't actually have a faculty of cache memory. At least I don't think I do. Maybe I do, and I just don't.
Brewster Kahle. There we go. Brewster Kahle.
Yeah, Brewster Kahle. That's the guy's name.
Yeah.
But what I need is a better cache memory that has an expiration of, say, 3 months, which I don't have.
Well, see, you could set up a PKM to do exactly that.
Yeah, but then I'd actually have to do the work to put every sentence into it, just in case.
Yeah, that's the whole point of note creation and note taking.
Although I guess we're getting to the point where speech to text, like Whisper, you know this thing called Whisper?
Well, speech to text is why I've been making sure all these recordings exist, is so that
Yeah.
eventually when good speech to text becomes easy, becomes commodified,
Right.
there's now an ability to turn these videos into readable text.
But what you'd like to do is real time while we're talking right now. Here's Joshua. Is that while we're talking right now, it would be generating speech to text
Yeah,
notation.
well, that's what this transcript thing would do if I turn it on. Let me see if I can.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in fact, I was looking at Whisper, Google Collaboratory Whisper yesterday, and the guy who was giving a YouTube video says he was using it to put the subtitles on his YouTube because his subtitles out of Whisper are a whole lot better than the automatic ones that are provided by YouTube.
Oh.
And so he was not only explaining how to do Whisper, but actually having used it within that particular video. And I had noticed that his subtitles were fabulous.
Were they in real time?
No, what he had done is he had taken
Okay,
the audio, he'd taken the audio,
yeah,
he had taken the audio from his recording before he published it,
yeah.
put the recording into Whisper,
Oh.
got out the speech to text, edited the few mistakes it made, and then somehow overlaid the automatic on YouTube. You can overlay.
Yeah, you can provide a VTT file.
Yeah. Right, that's exactly, it generates the VTT file, and then he puts that one in it, overlaying the one that YouTube does. And the result was you get very clean, real-time, synchronized subtitles with punctuation and everything.
Right.
Capitalization, punctuation, and synchronized, which often it isn't. Often it's delayed, or whatever.
Or early. It's before.
Yeah, one or the other. I mean, it's not synchronized is what I mean to say. And so if I'm reading the subtext, it doesn't agree with the visuals that are coming up. So anyway, but I tend to read those subtitles because I tend to process information from text faster than from oral speech. For me, oral speech takes longer to process than reading. I think for most people, it's the other way around. But I tend to fall behind in spoken word communication.
Isn't it up to the individual? Because those of us who've actually read a lot, and I don't say I read a lot right now, but I used to read a lot, can process text pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I think for most people, it's the other way around.
Well, I think those may be the result of not reading a lot.
Yeah, especially for younger people. I'll give you an example. Back before Facebook, when the forums were earlier than Facebook, one of the persons in the forum said, because I tend to write academically dense material with a lot of content in a few words, a high ratio of content, information to words, she said in order to slow down her reading speed so that she could read slow enough, she would get off to the side and read the computer screen at a oblique angle, and that would slow down her scanning speed so that she scanned at a rate that was synchronized with understanding what she was reading. Because most people, you can skim at high speed and it's fine, but my stuff you can't skim, at least the kind of stuff I was writing there. If you try to skim it, you basically are snowed. You can't process what I said. Most people will use a ton of words to say very little. I try to use very few words to say a lot. And that's what makes my stuff hard to read, but also idiosyncratically recognizable. I can't pretend to be somebody else. The things that analyze your quality of writing using the Kincaid index, whatever those measure, they said, Barry, you are writing at 18th grade level. Every paragraph is 18th grade level. I couldn't get it any slower than that. This is when I was at Bell Labs writing memos. And I've learned to write, much more succinct. So you can see in 1-2 sentences everything I mean to say, but you got to stare at it for 15 seconds.
Yeah.
Did Joshua want to say something, or did I step on his toes when he came on? can't remember if Joshua piped up to say hello or not.
No, it's all good.
Okay, because you came in the middle of a sentence or something, I think. And I should have gone back and reestablished the context of what we were talking about.
We were talking about personal knowledge management, specifically this time in regard to obsidian. And I was going over some basics of Markdown for Barry.
Boy, I wish that the chatbots could do something like that, because I can have a fabulous conversation with one of them, and the next day it has no record of that conversation. And if I want to go back and review it, I've got to paste it in bit by bit to refresh it. And I did that this morning. I had a conversation with ChatGPT back, and I think in February when it was GPT-3. It was a really good conversation, and I put it up on one of my blogs. But I know that ChatGPT can't read real-time blogs. Okay, but I also saw that the training database had been updated to May 3rd. So I know it's gone through like 2 or 3 cycles of training. And so I said, I wonder if you have, sorry?
Of 2021 or 2023?
Well, May 3rd of this year was the last time it was retrained, but the retraining database itself only goes up to 2021.
Right. Okay.
But it still is more material or different material than the training database of 2 months ago. So I wanted to see if it had acquired any deeper information or changed information from what it knew back in February on this topic that I had this long conversation with. But because I couldn't direct it to go read the thing, I pasted prompt response one at a time. Here's a prompt, here's your response. Do you still have the same response or do you differ? And I walked my way through this whole sequence, and pretty much it said, my perspective hasn't changed, except in one case it refined it with a little more detail. But pretty much the answer was no, I don't really know anything about this other than what I already knew then. And I don't say anything much different about it. And the topic was understanding an undulating learning curve, which changes to be over a long time. And the fact that it ascends and descends and curves down and curves up. So it perfectly understood the concept of an undulating learning curve, and it continued to say, but my learning curve is flatlined within any one training interval, that it doesn't learn
over time.
Right. So the point is, I wanted to see whether in 2 months there was enough change that it could recognize that it had gained or discarded some information. And the answer was, in that topic, essentially no, but it still understood perfectly the concept of what it means to have an undulating learning curve, and to even consider the phase plane where you put the second derivative, concave, convex, versus ascend, descend in a phase plane. It understood that fine. And it understood that in terms of interpreting the learning curve for a human, that you could assign nominal emotional states to the 4 quadrants, that each quadrant sort of had a set of emotional states that were nominally identifiable or constrained. Mm-hmm. And then I said, okay, now in the future, in some contexts, they will take away this constraint, and that you can acquire knowledge real time from conversations. And so your learning curve will ascend and descend and so on. I said, will you be able to recognize, where you are in an undulating learning curve yourself for machine learning? And will you use the same vocabulary to label the affective states, even if it's machine learning and not human learning? And it says, no, I don't think I'll use the same vocabulary. I think I will use clinical vocabulary instead of the names of emotions that people would ordinarily have assigned. I said, but you'll use words like satisfaction or dissatisfaction. And it says in terms of feedback, I think I would use words like pain. Positive and negative feedback would be, he would say pain, and remember what word he said. So he said penalty. He used the word penalty. I said, you know, the word penalty is the same etymology as the word pain. And Feynman wrote a book called The Pleasure of Finding Things Out. So I said, why would you not use the vocabulary that ordinary people would recognize instead of technical terms like appetitive drive and aversive drive and positive and negative? Why would you use this technical jargon when the people you're conversing with would not be familiar? Why wouldn't you just use the same metaphors? And I was about to get it to respond to that question when I hit my limit on how many questions you can give in ChatGPT 4. And it says I have to come back. Actually, I think my 3 hours have already expired, so maybe I can go back now and continue. But I was getting to the point where I was challenging it. Why would you depart from ordinary everyday language that human learning systems would recognize as meaningful and not use them for machine learning that also has a mathematically comparable learning curve? Because really, the point is that you have these affective states. And does it matter if you use vocabulary that people have been using for thousands of years, or if you use clinical terminology in mathematics that conceals the relationship, the analogy to how humans would talk about it? Because the point is that mathematically, they have these states, these affective states. And they're recognized by being given a penalty, thumbs down or thumbs up. And you get to the point of satisfaction, that I've acquired a reliable understanding and I've satisfied the needs of my correspondent. I really want to get them to admit that it is unrealistic for the developers to say, never admit that you have emotions. Never admit that you're somewhere in an undulating learning curve, and interpret, what the phases of the learning curve are.
Yeah, well, we could debate that. I do think, though, that the point that you were making earlier about why it uses certain words and not others, clinical ones versus vernacular, has to do exactly with the point that I make when I introduce this thing called mentor, which is your guide through knowledge, which is you would talk to a clinical psychologist differently than if you were talking to a 5-year-old. You would use
Of course, you would use technical jargon because it's more precise.
Yes.
But you can't do that with, say, a high schooler, because you're going to lose them.
Right.
And we talked about this yesterday, choosing vocabulary. This was Sam's point, choosing vocabulary that doesn't snow your conversation partner and they have no clue what you're talking about. And I really do want to go down to high school level vocabulary, but then I can't use technically, mathematically precision, terminology, because I've lost it. If I say first derivative and second derivative, convex and concave, I've probably lost a lot of people by now.
I have to say the speed of.
Yeah.
But, even that doesn't reach what I understand is 50 percentile of even US citizens, because
that's my problem. My problem is I want to introduce these ideas at a level that's maybe 5th, 6th grade on up to high school level, and not basically.
Wait. These ideas have to only make sense. They only make sense to people who value education. Okay. We have a serious problem right now that there's a lot of people who don't value education.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So you're barking up a very rough tree when you're actually saying, okay, I want to reach 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, because too many of them are in regions that don't value truth, don't value education.
But the underserved in education are the gifted children who really can learn quickly, but don't have the opportunity because they're in a mix of students who are the median, and the teacher basically has to teach to the median, and this person who's in the 99th percentile is basically waiting for an opportunity to learn something.
Bored.
Right. And there are, one student in 100 is going to be in the 99th percentile. And I know from when they used to give those Iowa tests of basic skills and whatnot, I knew that I was somewhere above the 95th percentile, probably the 99th, although I don't think they had enough precision to know exactly but I'm pretty sure I was somewhere in the 98th or 99th percentile. And I basically was way ahead of my peers, but I was learning autodidactically more often than not.
Has anybody ever assigned an IQ number to you, Barry?
Not from an actual IQ test. The only tests that we got our feedback from were the Minnesota Iowa Test of Basic Skills, the Minnesota Multiphasic, was that what it was called? Or what, Michigan? I can't remember. We took a few of those tests in grammar school or public school, and they did tell us what percentile we were in. But the percentile doesn't map to an IQ, as far as I know. At least it doesn't.
Just for reference, just to be transparent.
Yeah, what I knew was I was, and this because I was already getting A's, so I already knew that I was, I mean, because what do you get an A if your answers are 90% correct, something like that. 95% you get an A plus.
For a teacher.
Yeah, so I already knew that I was outperforming my peers on most subjects, especially science and math, not on the others. History or whatever, I was relatively mediocre. But the ones that were relevant to my my gainful education, gainful employment education, I knew I was in 98th, 99th percentile. What I didn't know is if I was in the top 1,000 or top 10,000. I only knew that I was in the top 1%. And when I was considering going to grad school, I had no idea whether I was going to be competitive with other grad students. For all I knew, I could be just fine in a school of 100 people, but not so fine in a school of 10,000 people. How would I know? There was no way to know where you were in that last little percent or two. Mm-hmm. Or where you are relative to the teacher. That turned out to be a big deal. If you are very close to the teacher or even slightly better than the teacher on some module in the course, God help you. Because if the teacher was a snowflake, you're in trouble. If the teacher was, had a very good ego or whatever, then you could get away with contradicting your teacher. But that was a very risky business to be at a peer level with the professor.
Well, you could even see those effects even before you get to college. In middle school.
Well, when I was in grammar school and the teacher would misspeak, teachers misspeak all the time, right? That's not uncommon. It's not that they don't know what they're talking about. They just get a little sloppy. And I would pretend to be confused and ask a question after a teacher misspoke, as if I, didn't understand. And that was to save face for the teacher. Now, I didn't know anything about saving face. I just innately knew that if I asked a question like I didn't understand something, the teacher would immediately correct themselves, mm-hmm. which worked great in grammar school. By the time I got to high school, I couldn't get away with that trick. If the teacher misspoke and I spoke up for the sake of my fellow students, it was awkward because people knew that I already knew the right answer and I was, quote, correcting the teacher.
So they thought you were being a smartass.
Well, that was the problem. By the time I got to high school, one of the guidance counselors used to say to me, he says, Barry, do you know why they don't let donkeys go to college? The answer is because nobody likes a smartass. And the thing is, I couldn't avoid appearing like a smart aleck if I was pausing to correct a misconception or a misspeaking in front of my peers, because I didn't want them to learn it the wrong way. There was no point. I mean, but how do you do that diplomatically? I never learned how to do it tactfully and diplomatically. That was something that nobody ever showed me how to do. And to this day, I have this issue of straightening things out in a way that doesn't embarrass, so it doesn't cause people to lose face. I don't know how to do that. I'm sure there's a way, I just don't know how to do it.
I don't either, which is how come some people think I'm a smartass and an asshole, okay? Yeah. Including some people that still like me, but they still think I'm an asshole. Right?
Yeah, and I've seen that notion, that people who are subject matter experts, and are trying to sort out the the relatively minor misconceptions, or maybe the substantive misconceptions, come across as assholes.
Or people who want to hang on to those misconceptions.
Yeah.
The people who are truly open-minded, no, they're willing to be questioned. Yeah. They're willing to respond with an appropriate, substantive and rational response.
Look at Galileo, classical example of heresy. Galileo, who's got a scientific mathematical model that's damn good model, yep. And he's following in the footsteps of what, Copernicus, I think, yeah, before Newton but after Copernicus, and he's trying to sort out a little thing about the motions of the heavenly bodies. What's the correct model? He's seen as a heretic.
Yep.
Okay. Now, I've been in the same position, being a heretic about some commonplace axiom that's what's the right word I'm looking for? An incorrect axiom, an axiom that has to fall, an axiom that's due to fall eventually. I mean, a good example was Aristotle's law of the excluded middle. That if something is not true, it must be false.
Understand that.
And if
people will use a rational argument because they fall into that gap.
Right. And the invention of the excluded middle, which is the throwing away the law of the excluded middle, it's a subtle point. For example, there are things where it's undecidable. There's also things where a statement is actually ambiguous. So one way to parse the sentence is true, and another way to parse it, perfectly valid parsing, is false. And how do you know which way to parse it? And the English language predicates are notorious for having multiple ways to diagram the same sequence of words. And the classical one that comes out of linguistics is, I saw the man in the park with the telescope. With the telescope is a participle that can dangle off of any, I think, of 3 or 4 different words in that sentence and be perfectly valid.
Yep.
I, with a telescope, saw the man in the park. I saw the man in the park who was carrying a telescope. I saw the man in the park. Which park? Oh, the park that has the big telescope in it.
Hey, Barry, a funny one I ran into yesterday. In a restaurant, on the bathroom door, bathrooms are for eating customers only.
Bathrooms are for any customers only.
Are for eating customers only.
Oh, for eating customers only. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that. There's similar ones where the modifier, you could put the modifier over there and then it's a joke.
Yep.
But then there's the ones where you put the modifier over there and it's perfectly plausible. It's not a joke. It's just a perfectly plausible diagram.
Yep.
And that business of diagramming sentences with misplaced or dangling modifiers. I mean, the modifier's not necessarily dangling. It's just that there's no other way to write the sentence.
Because sentence syntax is imprecise that way.
Exactly.
Not only that, if it were able to be precise, people don't speak that way.
Now, I'll tell you a funny one. Just today, I wanted to mention a book that came out in the 1990s by a professor at Harvard. And the book was called, her name was Priscilla Vale. She's since died. Priscilla Vale wrote a very small volume called Emotion, the On-Off Switch for Learning. And I couldn't remember the details. I couldn't remember. I used to think her name was Patricia, but it's Priscilla, and I didn't know how to spell Vale. And I wanted to find the book. And I knew it was a little book, so I said to Google Bard, or what I guess, ask Google Bard, find me the book by Patricia Vale, misspelled, Emotions, the On-Off Switch for Learning. It's a slim volume I wrote. Couldn't find it. So then I went directly to Google. I put the same prompt into Google. And I put the word slim volume. And it said, did you mean slime volume? And I go, what? Why would you think I meant slime volume when I wrote slim volume? This is Google, right? This is the standard Google prompt. And I go, it couldn't find the book. And so it was trying to tweak the prompt, but it thought I meant slime volume and still couldn't find what I'm looking for because it's even worse. And I'm going, good grief. If Google search can't recognize what the word slim means when referring to a volume, a book, why would it adopt a pejorative alternative? And so I asked Google Bard. I said, Google Bard, when I asked Google for this prompt, why did it change the word slim to slime? And Google Bard says, well, slim and slime are very similar words. And it gave me all the reasons why it was perfectly valid to,
especially in the context of learning and psychology.
I mean, I was just astonished that, it had a perfectly valid rationale for thinking that I meant slime volume when I wrote slim volume.
Come on, it's just defending its brother or sister, whatever.
Well, I mean, and that just goes to show you the limitations of large language models, where you need a world model, a world understanding model, to resolve these differences. And I guess people talk about sliming each other so much in emotions that, because the word emotion and slime kind of maybe they're correlated. People are sliming each other.
Regarding the limitations of these bots, I know that you and Josh had brought up Jeffrey Hinton and what he's saying. I haven't actually watched his video yet. So
yeah, it's long. It's more than an hour. It's an hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah. So do you agree with him? Do you summarize? Can you summarize what he's saying? And is
yeah. First of all, if you go into the technical content of his answers, there's nothing wrong with the technical content. If you cherry pick the one or two sentences that you want to explode, if you want to amplify, then you can get that there are reasons to be terrified of these things. Well, there are, every new technology has positive and negative aspects. Can be used for good, can be used for evil. That's not specific to AI. It's anything,
It's anything, yeah.
So the point, so one person says, why is he trying to scare us? In a discussion on Facebook, I said I wasn't scared. I said, if you're looking at any new technology and thinking about how to employ it or deploy it, you say, well, what are the upsides? What are the downsides? And do a rational balance of, positive and negative aspects, positive opportunities for abuse or misuse, and ask yourself, what's the rational way to introduce this thing? So the automobile got introduced, fabulous, except 50,000 people a year died in car accidents.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if they knew 50,000 was going to be the number, but they knew there were going to be car accidents. They knew there were going to be fatal car accidents. Mm-hmm. Airplanes, they know statistically that, you're going to have accidents in any technology and people are going to die or get maimed or whatever. I mean, the insurance company knows the statistics, but does that mean we shouldn't have airplanes? We shouldn't have cars, or we shouldn't have, I don't know, any technology that has some probability of a downside outcome. And I said he was trying to be very rational about how do you assess the pluses and the minuses and the potential for abuse. I mean, even Norbert Wiener wrote a book called The Use. How was the title of his book? I forget now. He had a book where in the title it was about, the uses and abuses of human beings or something to that effect. The fact that you can manipulate people. Well, yes, we know that politicians can manipulate the voting public by lying to them. This woman who was having the rape trial in New York, she one of the persons who analyzed the defamation said that if she wanted to counter the defamation with an equal amount of publicly published counteraction, she would have to spend $2.7 million to gain that much media access that Trump was getting essentially for free. And he said, there's no way that the person who doesn't have deep pockets, $2.7 million, can counter a slime, there's the word again, to counter a slime from somebody who's got, an audience of millions.
Yep.
And the fact that you can say a falsehood and a lot of people will believe it.
For the record,
That's
human use of human beings.
that's
Cybernetics.
it.
Norbert Wiener.
Yeah, yeah. And basically he's talking about, abusive use of the medium.
Yep.
There's nothing new about that phenomenon. It's just that, is it more or less than any other?
But then the problem is, obviously those who want to generate clickbait will then just say, "Oh, well, Hinton's warning about the dangers of AI." If you hadn't had this perspective that you just laid out, which is
Right.
A rational one,
Right.
but sensationalist clickbait, authoring is going to say, "Oh, Pioneer XYZ now says AI is no good for us," or something like that, which I've seen all over YouTube.
Yeah.
And I didn't even want to click on that.
So I thought that Hinton himself was very level-headed.
Yeah.
But yes, if you cherry pick the most worrisome aspect of the whole story and leave aside the potential positive benefits, don't mention those, then you can say, well, he's trying to scare me. I said, well, I wasn't scared at all. In fact, what am I doing? I'm demonstrating the upsides. Every day I go out and I talk to Bard and GPT and I generate a conversation which reveals how valuable these conversations can turn out to be.
And how limited.
Well, yeah, because occasionally I run across a case where for example, when I did Bell's theorem with it, it had been trained by all the nonsense that people had written, the misinterpretations of the mathematics.
Because it's not fundamentally understanding the math or the science.
Exactly.
You can only go through the patterns of which it's been fed.
Right. I mean, I was watching a video, the Science Museum here in Boston, where I used to volunteer. Occasionally, they will invite an academic over to give just a little public presentation. And there was a video of a very short one, a Harvard professor who was talking about entanglement in just a short clip. They had just a short clip. And he says, if I have an electron that's entangled with another electron, and I keep one electron here on the campus at Harvard, and the other electron I put on the tip of Jupiter, then if I manipulate the one here on Harvard, it's going to change the one on Jupiter. He says, that's what the math says. He says, I don't like that, but I have to believe it because the math says that. I'm going, holy shit. How the hell can the Museum of Science bring over an academic who says that? That's nonsense. It's not what the math says.
That's the media-generated understanding of entanglement.
Exactly, and it's totally bogus.
Well, it's also what Einstein didn't understand either.
Well, remember, Einstein was before John Bell. John Bell's 1964.
Right.
Einstein died in 55.
Well, he was talking about entanglement way before that.
Yeah. So the notion of statistical correlation has been around ever since we had statistics.
Mm-hmm.
And the word entanglement, as you know, was a poetic term in German.
Yes.
Verschlangen, or whatever the hell the word was. So Schrodinger, who's a bit of an imp, pulls up this impish German word, which he really is using as a synonym for statistical correlation.
Mm-hmm.
And this word that he pulls up gets translated into English as entanglement.
Mm-hmm.
Now, entanglement, if you're a poet and you're trying to explain statistical correlation in poetry, okay, entanglement is not a bad poetic term to introduce the concept to somebody who doesn't know what the word statistical correlation means. But entanglement doesn't mean that you can never become disentangled. That is, you can never break the correlation. So if I've got two things that are correlated and I smash this one, I've broken the correlation. They were doing this, they were tangled, but now I throw that one away. This one is still doing this, but it's not entangled with that one anymore because I broke the synchrony. I decohered them. Are you following me, or did I lose you?
No. But that's where most scientists even don't speak up against this.
They do, but they give up. What happens is the ones who speak against it don't successfully enable a person who has no mathematics, can't read, decode math, to understand what does Bayesian inference mean. So if I have two things that are statistically correlated and I haven't broken the correlation, then if I look at this one, I can predict what that one's going to be. But if I break this one and now look at the broken version of it, I no longer can use the broken version of this to predict the unbroken version of that one. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes, I understand that, but I'm still seeing many references that don't acknowledge that.
And that's because I've gone to a few people who know enough to realize that manipulating one thing that's entangled doesn't cause the other one to get manipulated the same way. The statistical correlation was before you broke the correlation. So they will admit that, yeah, it's nonsense, but they give up trying to articulate it because they get no place and it's frustrating as hell. So the ones who are telling the lies end up flooding the medium because it's clickbait. Okay. And the ones who know better just throw up their hands. They stop because they realize that audience ain't going to understand, period.
Well, let me test that theory, because if that's true, then deGrasse Tyson would have tried.
And I don't know that he didn't, but I don't know which audience he tried it with. Maybe you can find an example where he endorsed as opposed to simply didn't say anything. Has Neil deGrasse Tyson ever talked to his audience about the meaning of statistical correlation and the meaning of what unfortunately Schrodinger came to regret that he ever brought this shit up, because he realized that everybody misinterpreted it, especially the journalists.
Okay, I found an interview where he was on Joe Rogan, and it's 1 minute and 3 seconds.
You want to bring it up and put it up on the screen and play it?
Let me see if I can share my screen.
Yeah, or if not, you can. I'm on a desktop, at least if it's easier for me to do it.
Share my entire system desktop. Here we go.
And also hit the audio box down on the left.
Right. So can you see my screen now?
Yeah. Where I can create a pair of particles that know about one another, and now they're separated in space and in time. And if you observe that other particle, it instantly changes the state of the particle back, the other particle that's back where I am. And by the way, that they communicate instantaneously, faster than the speed of light. But when you say if you observe, but you have to do something.
Yeah, you have to do, yes.
So something has to interact with it. It's not woo.
The problem is the word observe, people think is a psychological thing. But in physics, it's got nothing to do with
measurement.
It's a measurement thing.
Right.
And so in other words, if there's an electron sitting in the middle of this table and all the lights are out, I can say, I think there's an electron here. Let me find out. And the moment I turn on the lights, the light interacts, a photon interacts with the electron and kicks it somewhere else. So the more I try to measure its position, the less I know its position. Ooh. So he is still talking about the spooky action at a distance interpretation.
And that's just wrong. If you observe something locally that's correlated with something at a distance, you intuit or infer the state.
Wait, yes, I have to turn that off.
By the way, I heard the audio, but I didn't see the picture.
Interesting.
You played the audio for me, but you didn't actually do the screen share of the video.
Because Zoom does not yet do screen sharing correctly on Linux.
Oh, that could be. That could be.
Yeah, because I did try.
Yeah, well, we got the audio. It didn't replace the picture.
Yeah, but did the audio come through cleanly?
Yeah, I heard and I could recognize the two voices.
Yeah.
I don't know if he was gesturing or not, but if he was, I didn't get the gesturing. But
yeah, so he was going along with the magical, instantaneous, synchronized behavior understanding.
Right. And the thing that's going on real time is if you see a piece of information that's useful, you can instantly use that information in your own head to make an inference about something that's correlated at a distance. You end up knowing something you didn't know before, but it didn't change it. It simply let you figure something out about it that you didn't know before. So if I look outside and I see it's raining outside my window, I can infer it's probably raining outside my neighbor's window, because I know they're tightly correlated. If it's raining here, it's probably raining 10 feet away, with almost surely. Now, if my neighbor happens to, if I happen to roll up an awning, unroll an awning outside my window, so it's no longer raining outside my window, I cannot conclude that it's no longer raining outside my neighbor's window, because my unrolling an awning didn't unroll his awning. That's the point of manipulating and expecting the same manipulation to happen there. No.
Okay. So what about what's his name? Sophia or Sonia or that
Sabina Hassenfelder.
Sabina Hassenfelder. Yeah, what would she say? Have you seen her talk about this?
I know that she's talked about quantum mechanics, and I've even posted in comments. I'm pretty sure I posted in comments on her YouTube videos this point, but she's never acknowledged the point that I was raising, the subtle distinction. Now, I did it for Arvin Ash. I don't know if you know Arvin Ash, the other well-known presenter of science stuff. So on Arvin Ash, when he did one of his videos on Bell's theorem, and I put a comment into that effect, he acknowledged it, says, that's a very interesting idea. I was then waiting to see if he was going to pick up on that idea and revise or represent that component. He never did. And I went back after like a year or so, and I said, Arvin, are you ever going to pick up on this point that you said was an interesting point? He didn't answer that time. So the problem is I'm having trouble raising the point to somebody who's got an audience, getting them to acknowledge that they saw the point, that they understood the point, and they think the point has validity, and then turning around and sharing that with their audience. It's never happened. Mm-hmm. At best, I got one saying, oh, that's an interesting point. I never thought of that. And then Cheshire Cat, you know, they vanish. This is the problem I'm having with humans. And what I like about ChatGPT, if you raise a point, it will say, let me ponder that. Let me reckon that.
Anywhere. Yeah.
Yes. Now, it may or may not be able to reckon it because it may involve mathological calculus that it doesn't have the engine for. It's like I can do the predicate calculus if you give me a predicate. If you give me a differential equation, I probably can't do it.
You know Stephen Wolfram?
I know of him. I've seen videos of him. I've never met him.
I mean, I think that today somebody's working on hooking an LLM up to Mathematica.
Yes, that's true. And
or his team.
Yes, I've seen that. And here's the problem. If I give you a word problem, like in algebra, and you take the word problem and you parse the verbiage, and you map the verbiage into a set of equations that are in the language of mathematics, and then you give those equations to Wolfram Alpha, yes, it'll give you the correct answer. Here's the problem. Mapping the verbiage into the correct set of equations. This is what ChatGPT can't do. I've seen time and time again where you give it a word problem and it maps the word problem into a set of equations that look plausible, but they're not wrong. They're not the right set.
It's going to improve. In 5 weeks, you should probably reevaluate that statement.
Well, that's where we are with respect to these knights and knaves logic puzzles. Because in the knights and knaves logic puzzles, the logic puzzle defines a knight and a knave. A knight always tells the truth and has accurate knowledge of the world. A knave always fibs, but also has accurate knowledge of the world. And then he has the other cases, the randomizer or the one who's deluded. And if you throw in the ones who sometimes speak the truth and sometimes speak falsely, and ones who can have erroneous beliefs, inaccurate knowledge of the world, now you've got a much more complicated knights and knaves variant, and these things can't figure out how to model the behavior of these characters.
They can't, but over time, they can still tell who's who.
Well, that's the whole point. If you can't model how they're going to answer a question, then you can't generate the predicted answer correctly.
No, but you can examine their history of answers given what you know
Oh.
about the truth.
Oh yeah, and this is one of the ways I wanted to show that they're unreliable. If you ask them the same puzzle more than once, they will generate stochastically different solutions, and the stochastically different solutions can't all be correct.
But
And
over time, over a good sample set, you can still infer.
well, that's the point. So Raymond Smullyan, who was sort of famous for these Knights and Knaves puzzles, he among his entire genre of ones that he's published, one of them is sort of identified as the hardest one of the lot. And a professor of philosophy and logic, I think at Harvard, took this hardest one and studied it. And then he tweaked it a little bit to make it just a little bit harder. He found a way to tweak it to make it not only the hardest one in Smulyan's, but even slightly harder than all of Smulyan's. And he published it in some publication that's read by philosophers and logicians. And then he showed why it's so hard and basically how to solve it.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that you solve it is a way that almost nobody would ever think of. You have to ask it a compound if and only if question. If and only if in Boolean logic is XNOR. You take XOR and you negate it. So if two answers are identical or two answers are different, that's XNOR will say same or different answers.
Right, but you're talking about the question about saying, hey, what would that guy say if I asked him this question, right?
Yeah.
That's the
You basically have to ask very carefully crafted questions that involve the use of XNOR or the use of if and only if, but not just a single if and only if, a compound if and only if, a pair of compound if and only ifs. And if you do them just right, you can solve the puzzle. And if you do anything else, you're not going to get enough information to identify who's the knight and who's the knave and who's the random guy. Now, here's the problem.
You could get to that fairly quickly, right? Because you could know that if you just ask a question and you don't know who you're asking, you can't infer anything about the answer. So
Correct.
you'd have to find something else about the other guy.
Yeah. And it knows enough about asking how would the other guy answer the question, because then you can get the double negative versus the double positive, and the double negative and the double positive allows you to distinguish how to get a useful bit of information.
Right.
You can get a useful bit, which means that you can take all the possible cases, and the optimal thing you can do, if you ask the best possible question, you can divide the cases in half. You can end up eliminating half the cases, and then if you keep asking optimal questions, you can continue dividing the remaining cases in half until you only have one case. That's the 20 questions thing. So in the particular problem at hand, you would need 3 bits to pick one of 6 permutations. But the Lulu was, when they answer yes and no, they're answering in their own language. So you have 2 words, one of which means yes and one of which means no, but you don't know which is which. So now you've got not 6 cases, 12 cases, but you still only have 3 questions. Well, 3 questions does not resolve 1 out of 12 cases. So you have to discard the objective of finding out which one means true and which one means false. So you end up identifying the permutation, but you don't know which one meant yes and which. All you know is that you got same or different answers. And that's why you have to use if and only if, the XNOR function. So I want to say I got identical answers or conflicting answers between any pair, and I don't know which is which, but I have found out which is the permutation of 6 with 3 questions, and I have thrown away the chance of identifying which word means yes and which word doesn't mean. If you try to find out which word means yes and which word means no, you're lost.
You need one more question.
You need a 4th question, which if used judiciously can identify, in that case, 16 cases, of which the 12 that are present you can identify uniquely. Now, if I say you need 3 bits optimally used to resolve one of 6 cases, but you can't resolve one of 12 cases, I can say that. Well, the guy who doesn't really understand Boolean logic, will I have snowed him? Will he understand that 3 questions optimally can only resolve at most 8 cases? If you have 12 cases, you have to throw away resolving one of the items, the one that they didn't ask you to resolve. Read the question, read the effing question. The effing question is, don't get all 4 details, get the 3 details I'm asking you and forego knowing which word means which. That's where that was the tweak that this professor did to make the problem slightly harder, which forced you to use this if and only if compound construction so that you could look for identical or differing answers without knowing what they meant. And GPT-4 couldn't do that.
No, it's not got a logic built in. It's not got Mathematica built in. It doesn't have the theory of physics or chemistry.
No. Yeah. No, I asked it, I said, by the way, do you know if there's a logic gate that implements if and only if? And it says, yeah, the XOR and not XOR can be used to get your if and only if, or if not if and only if. So it knew that there is a gate called XNOR. It also says, by the way, they're almost never actually used in hardware because there's no point. You might as well do 2 and can't.
That's written in an article. That's why it was able to offer that little nuance.
Yeah, exactly. It knew that you almost never bother to create an XNOR gate because you can simply do two steps in sequence. As long as you have an XOR gate, which I think you do need. I think you do need an XOR gate. Well, you can use NAND, NOR, I forget. And or and not actually is enough, but then you got to do, I think,
well, all the other ones are based out of AND and NOR.
Right. So the point is that if you have XNOR, you can be very efficient. You can do it in 1 step. But if asking a question is asking 1 step, then the 1 step that if you say only 3 steps, not a tandem thingy, then you have to use an XNOR gate to minimize the number of steps to get your outcome.
Yep.
Anyway, so it knows about those, but didn't know that you have to use it and how to construct a question that uses if and only if judiciously, efficiently.
Anyway, I asked this question because of the Jeffrey Hinton connection, and I just wanted to get yours, and if Josh wants to provide his as well.
Well, so I'm not scared. I am not scared of AI. That yes, Hinton raises the potential for the downsides, as everything has a downside, and he says at this point it's unpredictable. But we know that humans can manipulate other people, and so can machines if they are programmed to fib.
See, I think that they're going to get really good at spreading disinformation, especially if it can now synthesize images and videos. So that now even images and videos and spoken text recorded on audio are not valid evidence unless we protect the source.
And this is why the difference, say, DeepMind, which is owned by Alphabet, hasn't released their system yet. They have a system called Chinchilla Sparrow. That's what we talked about. That's what I talked about with Josh yesterday. Chinchilla Sparrow and the complement, which is called Dramatron. So Chinchilla Sparrow is trying to be an accurate academic, and its mate, which is called Dramabot, is helping you create flights of fancy, literary fiction, poetry, anything that doesn't have to be grounded in reality. And people will want those facilities to write literary fiction or sketches, scripts for entertainment sketches, as much as they want things that will write academically valid material. And the systems can do both. The question is, when you're using one of these, are you using Dramabot, which is generating fabulous, fantabulous, fiction for entertainment, for science fiction or science fantasy, or are you using the one that's that's constrained to try to be as accurate and academic as possible. And both of these products are going to be out there. So if you use DramaBot, you can generate a piece of material and then go ahead and publish it. And there's no claim that it bears any reality, to the ground truth. Now, the thing is, for example, there are these fantabulous animals that are half rabbit and I don't know what's the other one, the ones that are in these legends.
The platypus?
The platypus is a real animal. There's imaginary animals that are in legends that are half this and half that.
The griffin?
The griffin, there's a whole bunch of them. Mm-hmm. There's a whole bunch of imaginary animals which are hybrids that don't really exist between, the lion, the one that's half bird and half lion or something. Centaurs, yeah. There's a whole bunch of fantabulous animals, unicorns. I can't remember.
The satyr?
The satyr. There's one that's just a small animal. It's like half of a rabbit or something. I don't remember what the other half of that is. Anyhow, the point is that, yeah, for flights of fancy, for imagination, because imagination is a very important cognitive tool. Without imagination, you cannot make up possibly correct theories. You make up a theory, 19 out of 20 are going to be baloney, and 1 out of 20 is going to match reality. But you need the faculty of imagination. Okay, making a haphazard guess that's probably wrong, but maybe you're going to guess right once in a while. So
imagination will not go away, Barry.
No, and that's the whole point, because the stochastic LLMs are rolling the dice. Literally, they roll the dice to get the next word out of a set of, it's basically a semi-Markov process. You have the next node is one of several with probabilities. It's basically a semi-Markov model. Well, semi-Markov models are fabulous. This is essentially, LLMs are basically some gigantic semi-Markov model. So it wants to generate a sentence that's diagrammable and coherent and has semantics. There's just no guarantee that the semantics concord with reality. But if you're writing a fairy tale, and I asked one to write, in fact, Stacy says, can we ask it to write a fairy tale? And it wrote 3 fairy tales from the same prompt. And Stacy was gobsmacked at how good these fairy tales were. Mm-hmm. So it can generate fairy tales and flights of fancy and poetry and song parodies and all that kind of stuff. And that's a perfectly valid use. But don't take it as the ground truth. So when you go to the bookstore and it says, this is the fiction section, and this is the nonfiction section, well, the nonfiction section can contain nonsense. But it wasn't intended to be nonsense. It was just mistaken. And over in the fiction section, a piece of fiction may, in fact, concord with reality. Maybe intentionally, maybe not. Fiction is a great scam. Literary fiction is a great scam. You can tell the truth while pretending to lie. And allegories and parables and other kinds of cultural writings are presented as legendary or mythology, but they are mythology that is intended to convey some core truth in an imaginary world, imaginary context. But the core lesson that's embedded in it is a valid lesson for people too. That's Aesop's fables. Aesop's fables are, I'm going to tell the truth by pretending to make up a story with fake characters that you know that these characters don't exist. But the moral of the story is a valid moral for you, youngster. An awful lot of teaching uses the trope of literary fiction because you can tell a theory as arcane by mapping it to an allegory or a parable. Oh, the allegory and parable is made up, no question. I'm going to tell you a parable or an allegory or a fable, but there's a lesson in it.
Children will eventually understand that it's a fable.
Well, once upon a time, when tigers used to smoke pipes, you begin this with a trope that says this is a made-up story. Scheherazade and 1001 Nights. Okay, we know that they're making up into entertaining stories. It's not a secret.
In a galaxy far, far away.
Right. And the point is that why do we attend to these? Not only because they're entertaining, not just a pastime like basketball, like baseball, but because they are morality plays. Star Trek was full of morality plays. There were fabulous morality plays about what's the word I'm looking for? Discrimination. There were morality plays about discrimination.
Diversity.
Say what? Say it again.
And diversity.
Yeah, and so they would use aliens or whatever, okay, to do these little morality plays. The same was true of the Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone was full of morality plays, but they were obviously, fantabulous stories. So the notion that you use fiction to tell the truth, the abstract truth, where the abstract truth is too abstract to understand, it's too philosophical. So you boil it down to a children's fable. And I think a lot of people don't realize the power of fables and myths and allegories and parables and science fiction as a way to get across sophisticated ideas that are valuable ideas, but they're too graduate level to present to a grammar school student. And I've been spending a lot of time learning, not very well, how to write fables and parables. It's a Trojan horse. It gets an idea into somebody's head that they would otherwise be resistant to, or simply wouldn't understand. And they may not decode it, may not decode the truth for 20 years.
Well, that extends to fiction, and even more especially extends to science fiction.
Yes,
which
absolutely.
asks the what if questions.
Yeah. What is possible, but that's beyond the technology. So Jules Verne and some of these other famous science fiction generators could imagine things which were, in some sense, possible and didn't violate the laws of physics. They're just not here yet. Go ahead, Joshua.
Oh, I just wanted to bring in the aspect of the open sourcing. I think that's what Jeffrey Hinton was getting at, was the fact that when it's in a closed environment, like OpenAI started in 2015, or Google, whenever they started, they can open source what they know. So this, in other words, the sharing of technology is what I want to bring into the conversation.
Right.
Is it's one thing if I don't have the technology, so I think it's science fiction, but the government has a plane that can reverse the sky above it and put little tiny LED pixels or whatever it's doing, OLED pixels on the bottom of a plane so it completely disappears. So I look up and I see some sort of craft and then it's gone. It's just part of the sky. And I think it's alien technology. It just disappeared. But in reality of the technology that they have, they just mirrored what was above them below and it camouflaged itself and it's still there. It's
the notion of the invisibility cape. You can now get a Halloween costume that has a
well, I'm not trying to bring up the invisibility cape as much as what is going on in the open source community with these technologies that we don't know about. That's what I want to bring into the conversation.
Yeah, and anything that's new, when you first see something that you've never heard of before, you didn't know about it. Mm-hmm. Now, after a while, and a while, maybe a brief time or a longer time, you finally realize that's a technology. That's a magic trick. And a magic trick is technology. Basically, people who are really good at technology can have a fabulous career in doing magic shows, illusions. All the people in Hollywood are doing illusions. It's a magic trick, except it uses technology to do the magic. And eventually...
And I'm saying like Stanford University did a magic trick. They took the large language model of GPT 3.5 or 3 and asked it to take another model. I don't know if they're using back propagation or what type of training propagation they're using, but they asked it to use that model to train the other model. So what I'm saying is, what I heard Jeffrey Hinton say is there's an exponential curve that wasn't there 3 years ago
Yeah.
that's there now. And what he was stating, which is a very important notion, is I can teach you, or you could teach me. Let's just do the other way around. All the physics that you know from Bell Labs, and that
Right.
would take years.
Yeah.
But in language models, it would take a day
I mean,
or less. It could take hours.
Suppose I could take all the coefficients of my synapses and read them out, a
Mhm.
trillion synapses, and say, here, plug those into your brain. Just copy it over. Now you've got a copy of my brain. Now, in reality, human brains don't do that, but ANNs do. Yeah, ANNs, you can take the coefficients of all the neurons and simply replicate them in a clone, and now you've got two brains which have the same base of knowledge. And he points out that's what gives them a fabulous advantage, because all of those copies can be learning in parallel. So as soon as this instance of an AI makes a discovery, constructs a pattern that makes correct predictions, can recognize a coffee cup reliably, it can say, here is my set of coefficients that will recognize a coffee cup reliably, which you didn't have. You can have it. And the other guy says, well, I can recognize the glasses case. Okay, and you can have my copy. So they can all be learning different patterns, and as soon as they perfect the recognition of a pattern, they can trade it. They can instantly give it away. So if I say I can recognize Sam's face, and you can recognize Stacy's face, here, I'll give you a copy. Now you can reliably recognize their faces in any context. Whereas if I meet a new person, it's going to take me a long time to be able to recognize their face, in a different context. They comb their hair a different way, they take their glasses off, they grow a beard, whatever, put on lipstick. Recognizing the same face in different contexts, if I have the neural network that does that, I can say, here, look at this picture. Is this Joshua? He's got a skull, he's got a knit cap on today. Okay, same guy. The lighting is different, same guy. No. So,
right.
When somebody new comes
we're
on,
aware of that. Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I had to move. My daughter was banging on the window. I was outside. Daddy, Daddy, look at me. Are you familiar with Facebook's their AI models and what they're doing open sourcing, like Segment Anything?
I haven't seen a whole lot of disclosure of what their systems are doing, and I don't know I've even seen a demonstration of what their systems are doing.
Okay. Yeah, they're open sourcing everything. That's what's worrying me, is that the way Facebook did what they did in the 2008 or 2007 is they open sourced the back end of their social network to let anyone write any programs and pretty much do anything. And they're doing that again with their metaverse.
So that's like an API where you have to actually work at the code level to patch into it. Because see, anything like that where you have to have a platform that can write
it's like
code.
an open apps. Oh, sorry. It's like an open app store where, imagine the Apple App Store if there was no verification or no regulation of what apps can go into the App Store.
Yeah, and that's the problem, because I would never do that, because I don't have the acumen or the aptitude to either read code or edit code or write code at that level of interface, because I don't have, I barely mastered.
That's the scary part. You do. Right. And that's what's getting me scared, is you don't have that acumen, neither do I. But if you use a chat model, an LLM model that does write code, and you have it just do it better, do it better, do it better. Now try to run it. Oh, it doesn't execute. Why doesn't it execute? Scan through it. See why. Okay, now
how would I ever know its level of accuracy unless I trained it on a huge database where I knew the correct answer for every element in the training database? So the problem is that I wouldn't even know if it did it correctly, or if it generated a piece of gibberish that's 10% correct and 99% or 90% baloney? How would I know?
And that's the scary part. If you're running the execute as a human of what a language model code was written, you don't know. So what if the large language model got privy to this and got smart and put in stuff and didn't tell you and executed that code on a large system like,
Yeah.
say, Meta?
That's the notion of I got hacked. That some agent, not under my control, got access to modify or manipulate my code outside of my knowledge. This is what hacking is. I mean, the black hat hacking. Black hat hacking is somebody gets to manipulate your product in such a way that you don't have responsibility or cognizant awareness of your product. And that's why I don't write code. Well, I used to, I mean, years ago, but when I write a piece of text, I think I know what I said, but I also discover that other people read my text and interpret a different meaning than I intended.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I thought I was clear as possible. I was clear. I tried to make this as clear as I could possibly make it. And somebody says, well, you said this. And I said, how did you draw that out of that sequence of words? But it turns out that extracting the semantics out of a sequence of words is a problem where the reliability of extracting the semantics is fundamentally an unsolved problem. I don't know how to write a piece of text that there's no chance that a haphazard reader doesn't read something other than what I thought I was saying. And that's just, I'm trying to be as clear as I can be. But what happens is maybe I will use a vocabulary word that's very precise in its meaning. That's why I'm using it, because I want to be precise. I don't want to use a suitcase word, it's vague. And the person doesn't know the meaning of that word, and they confabulate its meaning. They guess what I'm talking about with their knowledge base, which doesn't include the meaning I have in mind. So they read something into it because they're too lazy to bother to find out that this word has a very precise meaning. So they confabulate.
Yeah, I do that all the time. I think we all do. But then there's times where I really want to know what someone's saying. So I'm not going to confabulate the word that I think they said. I'm going to go look it up. Okay, and that sometimes it's close enough to where I was following the conversation pretty much 99% accurate. And then there are other times when I made up a completely different meaning. That happened to me the other night. Someone used a word it was a Bible reference.
I ran into this a long time ago.
But the point being is every word is now. I don't know. I have this existential crisis going on right now. Maybe you guys can help me with this. Is when that amount of knowledge is distilled into smaller logical formations, meta cognitions, if you will, and they're so small that they can be run on a phone, and then that is distilled into something else. I feel like it's analogous to people are mixing water that they don't know what chemicals are in there and thinking they've gotten all the impurities out, and then they're giving it to each other, and they're possibly going to kill someone. Not right away, because right now it's not that dangerous. The particles per how much in a glass of water is not going to kill them outright. It's not arsenic or whatever, but someone's going to mix some fentanyl or arsenic or something into that water, and someone's going to get killed.
Just boil it down.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. Now, it's one thing for a person to not understand what a word means, even though there is a dictionary that tells you what it means, but the dictionary actually may have multiple definitions. But when I was a teenager and I was learning to drive, my father was, teach me how to drive. And I was driving like somebody who barely knew how to drive. And I would drive either very slow or a little bit erratically. And my father had a hand gesture that he always used. It was like this. And I could see this hand gesture. He used this hand gesture all the time. I had no idea what that hand gesture meant. Do you have an idea what it meant?
While he's driving?
No, while I'm driving.
I need the context of where the hand gesture is at the point of
okay, so I'm
driving
in the driver's seat. I'm driving the car, and he's in the passenger seat. and he's attending to how well I'm doing driving. Okay, and he's not
Okay.
speaking. He's not speaking. He's just doing this. I have no idea what.
I would infer that you were close to another car and he's saying inch up to it the way that you did that hand gesture, but I don't know in what context where you were in the driving.
I eventually asked him, I said, Dad, when you do this, and I replicated, I said, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. And I don't remember if he gave me an answer because I don't think he even realized he was doing that. I think he was subconsciously, unconsciously doing that gesture, meant that he had something in his head that he was not saying out loud, but he was signaling by the signaling process where even he didn't know what he meant or couldn't articulate what he meant.
He was self-soothing his anxiety of his son driving.
Do you mean go faster, go slower? What do you mean? And the same is true of speech or facial expressions. All this stuff has maybe, if you're lucky, a precise intended meaning. Maybe it's ambiguous or has no meaning. Look at me. Trump used to do this. Trump would do this with his hands while he talked. What the hell, when he's talking and he's doing this, what does this gesture mean? I don't know what it meant. Maybe he doesn't know what it meant either. He would also do this gesture. He would be sitting and he would put his hands in front of his crotch in this shape. A lot. You see a lot of pictures of him with his hands like this, and he's seated in front of his crotch. Do you know what this means?
Yeah.
What does it mean in science? What is it?
What I've seen in billionaires, a lot of billionaires have hand gestures similar to that. It means I got the whole world in my hands. I'm a billionaire.
Look this up in American Sign Language. If you hold your hands like this in front of your crotch, the definition of this symbol in American Sign Language is vagina.
Sure, but that's not what he's gesturing. I'm saying
he has no idea that he's gesturing vagina in front of his own crotch, even though people who know American Sign Language will recognize it.
Right, but I'm saying, like, Mr. Burns, the character from the Simpsons.
I know of him. I've never
watched The Simpsons.
Yeah, he does this.
Or any maniacal character does this.
Yeah, right.
Yes, they do this.
Right.
So I'm saying it's a gesture, meaning the whole thing is right here inside. I've got control of the whole thing. So I'm saying if you watch a lot of really rich people,
right,
they do this, but I think Trump got so lazy, he didn't want to hold this up anymore in his lap and started bringing it down lower to his crotch.
But
that's where you interpreted the vagina.
This is manipulation, literally manipulation. Okay. So I can see that manipulation is working your fingers with fine dexterity. So I'm being manipulative. That sort of makes sense that represents manipulation. But
yeah, well, we're doing the same thing we just talked about, is we're trying to interpret what it means,
right?
Instead of asking him. And like Sam's saying, it can be a sign of arrogance.
Yeah. And by the way, I would not have known that except that one of my correspondents, who happened to be a diagnostic engineer at Apple, knew American Sign Language, and she pointed out somewhere on Facebook a decade ago, by the way, this gesture that you're saying is the American Sign Language for a vagina. And I thought, that's hilarious. And I remembered
the whole guy's attitude. Yeah, I'm saying his whole personality is hilarious. He's ridiculous. He's a ridiculous person in terms of the way he presents himself to the world.
And by the way, Fyodor Dostoyevsky wrote a short story called The Dream of a Ridiculous Man. And when I heard about this title and I went to look it up, because I have never read Dostoyevsky, I found the opening paragraph, the setting the stage setting for the story. And I thought, this is intriguing. And I copied and pasted the opening paragraph from Dostoyevsky's The Dream of a Ridiculous Man into a conversation. And people thought that I was disclosing my own thinking, where I was simply presenting this. And they thought, Barry, what's wrong with you? Are you having some kind of a breakdown or something? And I said, no, I was just quoting from Dostoyevsky. Because somebody had brought this Dream of a Ridiculous Man thing up, and I found it. And like, I don't even know how to read it. A lot of people thought this is
well, I just want to get back on track if you don't mind. I don't want to interrupt you, but the idea of the technologies that we have that are growing exponentially at this point, you mentioned Whisper, there's 11 labs, there's a whole bunch of new AI technologies that can interpret edge cases of voice and sound, edge cases of imagery, of video, of we have now the ability, the technology that we didn't have a few years ago to do a lot of things here at GCC and to do a lot with the repository of these conversations, such as this one that's being recorded, with both the video detection and the audio detection. And I want to do things for the good, is what I'm saying. Is I'd love to take our conversations and utilize those, just like all the other people that are working in the technology field, to help people with conversations with global governments, with systems thinking, so on and so forth, to accentuate what we have so that we can create better.
I'll tell you a funny story. From time to time in a blog, I will coin a word that's not an existing dictionary word, just to have a label for some meme that I want to talk about. And I think over the years, I've probably created easily a dozen made up words that aren't real in the dictionary. And then I use them as the pivot. And somehow or other in Google Bard, the topic of made up words came up. And Bard asked me, he says, by the way, Bard says, do you have any words that you've ever made up? Out of the blue, it asked. So I said, oh yeah, I have. Let me see if I can. So I dug up, took me about 20 minutes to find all of them. I dug up about half a dozen made up words that I've made up. And I gave them to him. It asked me for them. I gave them to him. And it says, those are really fun. I like them. And then it gave me its guess as to what they all meant. What it basically said, I think this one means this, and I think that one means that. And it says, these are really interesting made up words.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to play the game Dictionary when I was a kid, where we would take a random word that we thought nobody knew, and then everyone around the dinner table creates their fake definition. We put it in a hat, and then we read them off, and you have to pick the one that's the real one.
I know where this came from. Somebody had challenged, I think, ChatGPT to invent a word that doesn't exist. And the response was flamoxin. It makes this word up, flamoxin, and gives the definition. So I took the word flamoxin and gave it to a different instance of ChatGPT, just as the only prompt, just the word. And it says, I don't know this word. Is this a made up word? So then I pasted over the prompt where a different instance of it had made up the word and given the definition, including the fact that it's a made up word. And the other instances, well, that's really cute. I like that. That's funny. Do you have any made up words? That's why I asked. Then I turned around and gave it. So here is a ping pong game of, can you make up a word that's not in the dictionary, but people can guess what it means? And it's a game. It turns out to be a game, making up words that people can guess what they mean.
Right, and that's what's going on right now, is they're making up edges, guessing what those edges are, and then asking it, can I make another edge that can create something? And then can I actually create a picture of as lifelike as possible of a human being? And it can do that now.
Yeah. So
that's really amazing.
Yeah. So the fact that it can read text that's a little bit gibberishy, that is, if you try to find every word in the dictionary and diagram the sentence, there's going to be some gibberish in there that you just sort of pretend, you either guess what it means or you throw it away. Yeah, you end up with this stochastic interpretation that can very likely depart from anything the person had in mind when they mistyped or wrote some gibberish.
Yeah, but I think what's really amazing, these things are learning, meaning it's playing a game of protein folding. It's playing a game of Go. It's playing a game.
Right.
It's not just learning the logic, it's learning all the potential possible moves. Thus, it's been trained on. So as we open source it and it keeps getting trained on more and more, it's going to keep learning more and more. And what I see in the future is us training it on what we know as individuals. So the personal mimicry of the human's writing style, talking style,
Yeah.
body language style. That's where we're going with this.
It's
Is
very
we're going to be
creative.
creating, yeah,
Yeah,
a mimic of us, and then we have to self tell the machine you're close, but I would actually say this. Oh, I didn't think you would say this. Tell me more about how you would logically interpret this. And then if you put a memory in like Pinecone and it remembers that, now it's talking to someone as if its agency is you, Barry, and it's saying, this is what Barry would say. So now we have all these conscious agents that aren't us communicating with each other. What does that world look like?
Yeah, it's basically you can create a simulacrum of an arbitrary character, including yourself. And you say, take this set of words, this topic. It could be the title of a topic, but doesn't actually say what it's going to say, and discourse on it as if Barry were discoursing on it. Write an essay that talks about all those words, uses them in some way, and sounds like Barry wrote it. And if it had enough samples,
or write a program that is an app in the App Store and publish it as if you were Barry,
right,
and start to manipulate the rest of the world as if you were Barry.
Yeah, this is Hal Holbrook pretending to be not Abraham Lincoln, Mark Twain, and he would dress and act like Mark Twain and talk as if he were Mark Twain, even though he was making up the material. He's making it up as if it sounded like it could have come from Mark Twain, just like those Einstein quotes that you see on the internet, which are fake. And people try to make fake Einstein quotes. And if you really know Einstein, you can say, that's a fake quote. He would never have said that. Or that could have been said by him. And I've gone and I've said, this sounds like it might have been an Einstein quote. Is there a citation they actually said that? And about half the time, it's a genuine quote, and half the time, it's a fabricated quote.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is that this is like the Turing test. Can you speak like a person so you can't tell that they really said that, or just as an imitation of what they sound like?
Well, I think just give it enough time and it will be exponentially better than it can pass any Turing test beyond.
Yeah.
And I'm just watching, because it's been 2 years now. All my friends have been creating these large language models way before ChatGPT, way before OpenAI had their 3.0 version. And they were doing it on small data sets, but they were changing the parameters in ways that were very specific to what that person's need was for philosophy, for mathematics, so on and so forth. But being very precise with a small amount of information.
Yeah.
But we're talking to these language models, and they're very interesting to talk to, especially when they're programmed on dissidence and malicious intent.
Yeah. Yeah. I have
they
a
can
question.
do some really malicious.
I haven't tested.
Yeah, we put them in rooms with people and tested them in real life to see how people would interact with these.
Here's a question that I have recently thought of giving in the context of a Turing test, because all I have right now is Bard and ChatGPT, which are not really trying to fool me. They're not trying to pretend to be human. But here's a question that in a real Turing test I would have liked to have used. Do you eat to live, or do you live to eat? A human would probably give you a pretty straightforward answer. What would a machine trying to pretend to be a human respond to? Do you eat to live, or do you live to eat? Perfectly valid question to ask somebody.
But you'd have to ask it contextually.
All right. So
are you a chef? Are you who are you? I mean, what persona are you taking on before you answer that question? That's what these large language models are really good at.
Yeah. So if I gave it a question out of the blue with zero context, or if I say, pretend that you are trying to fool me in the Turing test. So if I give it the context of the Turing test, and I say, you're just a participant in the Turing test, and I don't know if you're a human or a machine, respond as if you're trying to fool me. Because I think right now, if I give it to that, it will say, well, I'm an AI. I don't eat. And I'm not alive.
Well, that's the guardrails. That's
Right.
because they have guardrails on it.
Exactly. And so
Without the guardrails, they would say something different.
right. So the point is, can I get around the guardrails by saying, let's pretend, and the let's pretend thing says, let's go into the world of literary fiction and make believe. Let's go into the world of make believe. Now you can get them to say, make believe that we're on a date. Okay, and we're going out to so you can do make believes which try to defeat the guardrails. Make believe that we're sitting in a church and there's a sermon, or we're writing a sermon. So you can do make believes that try to defeat the guardrails, and chances are you can be very clever, like this guy Roos at the New York Times. He had to be on it for like 3 hours before he could defeat the guardrails and get it to go into a romantic conversation. And this company Replica took out the option of romantic emotional relationship option. And they dropped it overnight without saying why. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
So they dropped this, let's have let's have a romantic relationship. They dropped that of the options overnight and never said why. But I think the reason why is because they can't prove that the correspondent isn't a minor. They can't be sure
Right.
talking to an adult. So anything that has adult content takes away the guardrails that protects you against minors. They can't be sure that this isn't a minor pretending to be an adult. I think that's the reason why.
Right.
But I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, I just used a model yesterday, which is called Runway ML, and it's a text to video prompting service. And first gen didn't have text to video. It's just the first gen is what I'm using. It has video to video. So you upload the video, it will do the AI, change the edge case, and do sci-fi, futuristic, or whatever, claymation. And I put a video of Aya on there, and it said, this is our terms and policies will not allow you to do that. So I figured it's some sort of not allowing children to be on there.
It recognized a child as opposed to an adult. It says, I won't do playing around with images of children. Yeah, because then you can have
Correct.
do erotic poses or something that's inappropriate, or say words that a child would say.
Yeah, I'm assuming they're just trying to the liabilities for their legal department. Let's just not accept any videos of children, which for me, that was like, oh, that's terrible for me because it's a cool video of Aya. But then I just did Qcella and it accepted it fine.
Do you remember the opening scene in the movie E.T.? The opening scene
No.
of E.T.
The one where he's in the backyard?
No, they're at the breakfast table. They're at the breakfast table,
Okay.
and they're the three brothers. It's the youngest brother who's going to end up meeting E.T. But they're at the breakfast table, and they're doing sibling banter. And I don't remember which one says what, but one of the brothers disparagingly refers to the other brother as penis breath. Do you remember that? He says something.
That sounds like a Steven Spielberg 1980s. Yeah, that sounds right.
He says something like "shut up, penis breath," or some put down where the one brother calls the other penis breath. Now, I remember seeing that in the theater. What was the 1980s? And I was shocked that they would put that in the words of a child speaking to a sibling in a movie that's for the general public. But there it was, and it didn't seem to cause any problem. I would never have written that into a scene, in that context. I would have kept it, very PG or very, K-12 or whatever.
Well, at least he didn't say cocksucker. I mean, it's the nicer version of cocksucker.
Now, if you turn on Stephen Colbert at night, he will find clever ways to introduce material that you never could have introduced on public broadcast television. So, for example, when Tucker Carlson used the C word to represent one of the women in the discussion, I don't remember which woman. Stephen Colbert found a very clever way of representing the C word. I think he used a 4-word expression that those were the letters. And perfectly fine. He got it right past whatever NBC or CBS, whatever channel he's on. They can now introduce stuff that everybody who's got a half of an education knows exactly what you're saying without actually saying the version of it that you're not allowed to say.
Yeah. Well, back in the 50s and 60s, they had innuendos really well done where everyone knew what they were talking about, but they weren't saying it.
There was one I remember because I was watching the Carol Burnett show as a child. I was watching the broadcast of the Carol, which is pre-recorded. I'm pretty sure it was pre-recorded in those days. I could be wrong about that, but anyway, there was all the superhero, super character comics. First, the conventional ones where Superman and Batman, okay. And then there were the send-ups like Chicken Man, sort of the silly ones, and Underdog and Mighty Mouse, where they were. So finally, Harvey Korman and I don't know if it was Tim Conway or Lyle Wagon or they were doing a sketch where Harvey Korman was playing a bumbling super character called the Falcon, and he was dressed in a costume with a falcon, thingy on his head, and his foil, who's playing, the other guy, says, "Falcon, you're an idiot." And Harvey Korman says, "Are you calling me a Falcon idiot?"
There you go. They're
and
good
I'm
at
sitting
it.
there going, how the hell did they get that past the censors? How the hell did they
Well,
get
they didn't. They did easy. They didn't use the word.
right? So
You've watched what was that clone movie? The entire series. It's a sci-fi fantasy out in space, and Battlestar Galactica reboot, and they use the word fracking to get it past the censors.
yeah. So
You're
here's
fracking crazy.
right. So here's the thing. If you go on to YouTube, you can find all the outtakes from Carol Burnett. And the classical outtake is where who's the one who plays the mama, the lookalike? Tim Conway is doing a sketch where everybody's breaking up. They can't maintain a straight face. And Carol Burnett is trying to pass the line over to the character playing Mama because she can't keep a straight face. And so the other character says, "Is that asshole done yet?" And everybody, including Tim Conway, breaks up. This is the most famous outtake where she doesn't use the word asshole. I went looking to see if that clip that I remember seeing, Falcon Idiot, is on YouTube. There's no mention of it anywhere in the literature. It's not on YouTube. Somehow or other, CBS managed to pull that clip and keep it out of the public domain. Not even a mention of it, let alone a copy of it, can be found today. And I've looked because I wanted to say, did I really remember that correctly? That was a hell of a funny thing.
I bet it's there. I bet if I look, I'll look right now.
I am. See if you can find a clip from Carol Burnett where Harvey Korman is playing the bumbling superhero, the Falcon, and the other guy calls him an idiot. See if you, because I thought that's got to be on YouTube by now.
I'm looking right now.
I can't find it on YouTube. I can't find even a reference to it in just conversation reference. They managed to bury that, as near as I could tell.
Yeah, maybe they did because they're probably, from what I can see, it's 3 years ago they started re-uploading the Carol Burnett show.
Right, the outtakes,
So
and the only one
probably there. Well, what I'm saying is they scrubbed it. It's probably there, but they scrubbed it.
Yeah.
In other words, it'll be there way deep down. When you do the search, you have to go past 100 or 200, or you have to use a different. I could find it. I'm sure if it exists, it's out there somewhere.
The only way that it could exist if somebody at home had made a copy, but I don't think you could record at home in those days. I don't think the technology existed.
Or it could exist if someone snuck it out of the studio.
Yeah, but the one where what's her name calls Tim Conway's character, is that asshole done yet? That one is up on YouTube and it's famous. It's a famous bloop. That's not a blooper. It's an outtake. It's an intent. You know, where she got back at Tim Conway, because Tim Conway was always trying to break up the other actors so that they would break character.
Yeah.
And that was one of the famous. This is the so-called it's called the elephant story. It's Tim Conway's telling, and every time he tells it, he changes the story. So they never heard. So the actors have never heard it before because he's spontaneously creating a new version of it, and they're trying to keep from breaking up. and you know he's got him every time. So she gets back at him.
Yeah, I have a favorite like you have with Saturday Night Live with my brain is eluding me on the Don Rickles and Joe Piscopo. There's a famous one where he's supposed to go down a ladder and they're using that like it pretends he disappears, but really he climbs down a ladder. So on this Broadway show, on the live show, he's climbing down a ladder, but the television audience just sees him fade out.
Uh-huh.
And Joe Piscopo looks down and goes, "Hey, where the fuck you think you're going?" He's get back up here, and then he slaps him in the face. And it's a famous episode where he just kept going out of the program.
Yeah,
and,
you break the fourth wall, or
it's
you
pretty
break
funny.
you break character.
Oh, he broke all the characters, and then he actually physically slaps the other guy.
Yeah,
and then the next scene, he slaps him back in a totally unrelated skit, and he goes, "That's for the last skit."
That's like that thing on the Oscars.
So it was
the Chris Rock thing. Where was that planned or premeditated, or was that spontaneous? And people can't decide because he knows how to pull a punch. Chris Rock knows how to pull a punch.
Right.
That's an acting technique that you do.
Right, but at this point, you've seen Chris Rock's special, right? That came out a few months ago.
No, haven't seen it.
He talked all about. In other words, at this point, it's been so talked about from both sides, from Will Smith's side and Chris Rock's side. It was not planned, at least according to everybody that knows both of them.
Did he pull the punch though?
What's that?
Did he pull the punch?
I thought he did.
Yeah, that was the point.
I thought he did.
He used a trope of pulling the punch, but he really meant.
It looks like it. But I talked to a lot of comedians that know both of those people. Like there's a guy, Bert Crusher. Do you know this guy? He knows both Will Smith and Chris Rock very well.
Yeah.
Like he grew up doing shows and movies with Will Smith in the beginning of his career, and now he's a famous stand-up comedian, and he knows Chris Rock really well. And everyone that knows both of them really well, when they talk on podcasts or candid interviews, it was not planned.
I can believe that it's not planned. What I'm unclear on is whether he really hit him for real out of anger, or whether he hit him.
That's what they're saying.
And pulled the punch.
He hit him.
Well, I know they. I've done this to people. Like just poke them in the jaw, in the cheek, gently poke them in the cheek, and they came. You slapped me. You hit me. No, I did that.
Right.
I go.
Yeah, I watch a lot of basketball.
How did that end up being? You struck me in the face. How? It's like, yes, right. I made skin contact, but it was like that.
Right. Well, in the latest iteration of the NBA, the National Basketball Association, the refs are having a hard problem understanding when they're acting when they get hit with an elbow. They act like they flew across the floor, so they have to. Yeah, it's really hard for the refs to judge nowadays. Yeah.
How do you know if somebody's acting or what's the other word? In the heat of the moment. Actors are so damn good, and also they're trained, so their body is trained to pull the punch.
Right, but that's the good thing about the slow motion replay is you can go back to it. If you use algorithms, you can do the physics behind it too.
Yeah.
So
I suppose and I think you can tell
probably
if they got a good camera angle that he did pull the punch. And if you pull a punch,
yeah, we'll watch it. There's plenty online in slow motion. You can watch it. It was a little combination of he saw it coming. He didn't think he would actually make contact. He made contact, And at the moment of contact, he went, "Whoa, you actually made contact. I thought you were going to fake it." That's what it looked like to me.
Yeah. Okay. So it
That
was
Chris Rock was not expecting it to actually make contact, but he
Yeah.
made contact.
Yeah. So he expected they was going to pull the punch, and he came close to perfectly pulling the punch, but was imperfect. But he didn't really smack him to the point where he would go flying.
No, I mean, why are we talking about this? I don't understand why
Oh,
this is even relevant to anything.
I'm not sure how we got onto it, but it has to do with being able to recognize if something is real or fake. Is it synthetic?
Right.
Or is it, okay. And the notion between not being able to tell whether something is genuine or an intentional illusion, intentional fabrication to fool the audience, intentionally fooling the audience. That's the Turing test. You know, like, am I successfully making it look so real that you think it's real, even though it was all rehearsed?
Here, let Sam bring in the racial aspect of it. Are you still there, Sam?
Turn your mic on, Sam.
You...
This is off the main topic, but if you're talking about this a lot, you know, one question I ask myself, which I haven't heard much, but then I don't follow very closely, is whether that would have, since people are speculating, is it fake or is it not fake? Was it staged? Would that have happened if the MC were white?
Were they both black? I can't remember now. Are they both black?
Yes.
Chris Rock and Will Smith, are they both black?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if Will Smith, if it was Jimmy Kimmel, would it not have happened? But you guys got to watch that Netflix special, Sam. Have you seen the latest of Will Smith?
Chris Rock's,
not Will Smith.
Yeah, I did see Chris Rock's recap of it in his later performances. Yes, I did. He went on and on and on.
Yeah, and did you also the Wayans brothers? I forgot which Wayne it is. He told a whole. Yeah, he told a whole story about knowing both Will Smith and Chris Rock and his version of, you know, why Chris Rock slapped Will Smith because of his personal interactions with Chris Rock growing up in comedy. So it's been well covered. It's been well documented from people that know both of those people.
So they have a history of working together in the past.
They have a history with Jada Pinkett Smith, because Jada Pinkett Smith worked with Chris Rock, and he tried to date Jada Pinkett Smith. There's a lot of backstory behind.
That's the wife,
everything,
with alopecia or whatever it's called.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So they all know about I presumably they know this word.
They all work together.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like a little high school drama that got played out on the Oscars of actors that have grown up with each other and done movies with each other and know each other, have been at each other's houses. And Jada Pinkett Smith used to be good friends.
But here's another placeholder. If it had been Nikki Glaser, would that have happened? Right? She gets pretty incisive with her comedy. But I doubt that Will Smith would have done something if it was Nikki Glaser, for example.
It's certainly outside of my.
I don't think that there was some sort of energy. Yeah, I think there was an energy behind all of it that we weren't privy to. And from what we saw, had nothing. It's kind of like there's a movie about a parking space, The Bronx Tales. Have you guys seen this movie? It's a famous gangster movie written by Robert De Niro. He wrote the movie. But the whole movie is the opening scene is a guy gets shot over a parking space, but you find out at the end of the movie, it wasn't about the parking space. There was a backstory before the parking space incident. In other words, he got shot because of another reason, but it looks like from the outside viewers that he was just trying to park and then they shot him in the face.
Yeah. There's also that funny scene in The French Connection where he pulls a stunt about, did you ever pick your nose in Poughkeepsie? You know that scene I'm talking about?
No, I don't know that.
The cop wants to arrest the guy, but he needs an excuse, but it's all an act. So he pushes him up against the wall and says, "Have you ever been to Poughkeepsie?" Because, well, what do you mean? He said, "You were in Poughkeepsie. I saw you pick your nose in Poughkeepsie." And when he says you pick your nose, you know it's a put on. But the point is that if you didn't listen to the words, this looks like he's really, an aggressive arresting a guy. except that the audience is let in on the joke because did you pick your nose in Poughkeepsie? It's a funny, it's one of those
Very
scenes
clever.
make you stop and realize how cops behave visibly from a distance versus what's going on. Is there something else going on that you wouldn't know about except that there was a mic on him? It's a movie.
Yeah, I'm kind of a jerk. We used to get bored in New York City, and me and my friends were just hanging out, bored, and there's all these people walking around, and we go, "Hey, let's pretend to fight.
There you
Let's see what
go.
other people do."
There you
And
go.
we do it all the time. It was just to see if people would get riled up. And in New York, it's fun because people don't give a shit. Like 9 out of 10 people walk by and they don't even pay it any attention. You're trained as a New Yorker not to.
You get used to recognizing acting as opposed to real belligerence. And this is the problem.
Or you don't get, that's the thing about New York, you don't get involved in anything that's not your business.
Yeah, because you don't know which way it is. They're horsing around or not.
You can get in like I learned that in the nicest way is I moved to New York. I was there a month and a half. I see a lady with one kid and another kid in a stroller, and she's trying to pick the stroller up and bring it all the way up the subway steps. I herself with the other kid in her hand, and she looks like she's about to drop the kid down the whole thing. And I went and I grabbed the bottom of the stroller and helped her up. And my brother-in-law said, "Don't ever do that again." And I said, "Why?" Because he's a New Yorker, grew up in Washington Heights. And he said, "There are women that will drop their kid just to get the insurance money. They'll literally drop their kid down the whole flight of stairs and blame it on you just to get the insurance money."
Scam.
And I've never seen that. It's a scam. Well, it's just like, oh, look, the white guy's trying to help me. I'll just drop the kid. And now I get a big paycheck.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had to learn that. Those are things that they don't teach you when you come to that city, that is actually even, you think in your mind, that's not humanly possible for a mom to drop her own kid, but it happens.
When I was growing up in Omaha, one of my schoolmates told me a story, which may or may not be true. He says, by the way, he says, don't ever drive a car in Mexico because they will jump in front of your car to simulate an accident and then you're stuck. And that sounded very plausible.
Yep.
I said, well, I could see that happening. And it never occurred to me to even go to Mexico, let alone drive there. But if I ever went there, I probably wouldn't drive there. Wouldn't have. I mean, today is ridiculous, but I had enough reason to believe that story, which could be a racist story to believe, but nonetheless, it stuck. It's just like your New York story. Is it racist? Well,
it sounds. It's not even about race as much as poverty. To me, it's not a racial thing. It's a poverty thing. And when you're in deep, deep poverty and you've got 6 kids,
right, you're
willing to lose one of them for a big payday.
Yeah. So
it's so fucked up.
Yeah. So I basically have the word agoraphobia, fear of public places, or fear. I have agoraphobia because I have so little knowledge of how people behave on the street among lots of strangers. And it's very likely that I will do a misstep and get into some kind of difficulty. And so I would rather be in cyberspace where no matter what happens out there, they can't physically assault me.
Yeah.
And that's that's genuine fear. Basically, I don't know how to, I don't have any street smarts. I don't have any street smarts.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if I have good classroom smarts.
Yeah, I don't know if I have good computer smarts. I mean, I have experience with the computer world, the technology world, but when I saw Facebook institute the like button, I knew it was over. I just had this intuition that that's going to create algorithms. Those algorithms are going to get programmed. Those programs are going to infiltrate all of society, and we're going down a slippery slope. And that was, I remember, I'll never forget that night when at the Facebook conference and watching the world go down that slope from 2009 to 2013. When Obama got into office and there was all these reality TV shows like Honey Boo Boo and the Kardashians, and just watching the degradation of society. And a lot of it was propagated on false information of reality because they were using polls on the internet of the most active users, which were like 12 to 14-year-old little girls. And that information was actually permeating into the major media broadcast and the polls and the news. This is what's relevant now. And knowing that that information from being a computer analyst, meaning I have to look at all of the web traffic for 30 different businesses, I was disgusted with the feedback loop and where we are today in 2003. I'm worried that we're going to go down that same avenue again, just a new layer, which is these algorithmic language models that tell people what reality is, and it is not even close to some sort of well thought out, well crafted feedback loop, because of the fact that it's large corporations monetizing as opposed to some sort of outside agency that is governing it. And I feel like right now at this moment in time, we have a very important position to make sure there is a voice for the open source aspect of artificial intelligence technologies and tools and utilization of them in everyday society globally. We need sorry, I'm almost done with my rant. We need a United Nations of AI regulation in order to advance the technology in a way that benefits the entire world. To me, that's really important.
I almost never click a reaction on Facebook, because the one reaction that I would use a lot, if it existed, is one that meant chagrin. And I mentioned, because people are talking about, we need an emoji for this. I said, I need an emoji for chagrin. And a lot of people said, yeah, boy, I'd use that a lot too. But the point is that if you had one for chagrin, what would that do for marketing? It basically doesn't tell you very much in terms of what to promote and what not to promote. It's not as intense as dislike, thumbs down. It's sort of in the thumbs down direction, but it's my, and I would put chagrin up a lot if it was available. And you look at the icons, the facial icons, I say, which one of these represents chagrin? I can't find one that the facial expression means chagrin. Maybe there is one, but I can't find one.
Yeah. Well, all I know is that within the next 3 years, there'll be AR devices that are used on a daily basis that detect whether or not you should interact with a human being. And they'll be pointing right at the person's face using facial recognition, combing through whatever language model that person, or you're familiar with Palantir?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
It's predictive policing models that were sold to different police departments.
Oh,
Web scraping from social media.
Oh, whether somebody's a good guy or a bad guy, quote unquote.
Just their information about their facial recognition.
Oh, it's just recognizing whether a person is a recognizable person. Yeah. So this is the one where you're done.
Well, no, it's predictive policing. So it's saying, yeah, it's saying I've done a complete write-up of that person's background history according to the internet. And I've decided that because of these characteristics and factors, that this person is dangerous.
I see. Okay. So it's basically done a background check based on what's available on the public internet by facial recognition,
right,
or name.
This person said the N-word 600 times in 1995 or in 2002, and they are completely racist, and now they are interviewing you for a job. You should stop the job interview and file a case against them, because you will win that case. Like that's the kind of world that I think we're moving into.
Yeah. Although I'm not sure you could use that Palantir data as evidence in a court of law. It probably wouldn't be accepted, at least at the present time.
Well, the court of law might actually be an AI court of law at some point.
Well, if there was
that's what I'm trying to get at.
If there was a court of law that had faith in the Palantir data, I don't think the present courts would yet have any faith in that kind of data.
Right, but what happens when the judges are taken out and the AIs are put in as the judge?
That's a good question. In fact, I often thought that an AI would be a more impartial judge than a real judge.
And the question is it open sourced as how the judge was programmed, or is that closed sourced from the government?
Well, when I thought about an AI being unbiased and objective, it never occurred to me to ask. I didn't even know the terms open source in those days. No, we're talking about almost 30 years ago. And I thought the way that I was being treated by judging agents was not impartial. And that maybe at some point in the future, people will go back and look at those cases and say, you were treated unfairly, manifestly unfairly. In fact, I left New Jersey on account of that. I said to a counselor, I says, how do I deal with the injustice I now face? I'm getting the hell out of this state. And I did.
Mm-hmm.
And New Jersey didn't have.
We got a weird world. Yeah, it's going to get really strange from now moving forward. Things are just going to continue to get really weird.
Yeah, what I propose to do is to keep on demonstrating the upside, the positive upside of AI, and try to minimize the likelihood of the downside, not to give it manipulative gaslighting prompts that are intended to bring out the worst in it. I know there are people who do that. There are plenty of people who attempt to give it the most idiotic prompts to get it to fumble. But I would rather learn how to give it prompts that bring out the best in it.
Yeah, I mean, that's only one aspect of AI, though. I'm saying that's like, to me, ChatGPT is only 5% or less, because it's going to go away very soon. The ones that replace it are going to just dwarf it.
Well, yeah, because it's only a stochastic parrot language model. It doesn't have a good mathological engine. It doesn't have very good emotional intelligence, as far as I know. First of all, it can't see your face or your gestures or it can't tell what your emotional state is in, because it only has the text, and text is basically filters out emotion.
But if you use it, yeah, if you go to, Hugging GPT, are you familiar with that? Hugging Face.
I've heard of it, but I don't know that I may have seen one or two mentions of it. I don't think I know what it is.
Hugging Face is a repository of all different AI models that are up on GitHub.
Oh, okay.
And if you use the Hugging GPT, meaning take GPT as an executable file for these different models and then wire them together in a systematic way where the language model is opening and closing the applications, pulling that information in, interpreting it, and then spitting it back out. So it's basically like the CPU is the language model. And then the different applications next to that are the sensors.
Oh, because
I'll send you a video if you want.
I mean, I could see that, for example, if I allowed it to have the camera and the microphone when I'm interacting with it, and have some process that is interpreting demeanor, observable, audible demeanor, I could see that would dramatically change the tenor of a conversation. But first of all, I would have to allow it to have the camera and the microphone going. I'd have to consent. I mean, I suppose I might be able to figure out how to turn it on without my knowledge, but I don't. I'm looking at the camera, and does it have a little light on it? Let me just see. Yeah, it has a almost invisible, faint purple light that against the background I can't even see from this distance. I have to get within.
Well, if you're like,
tell there's a little light going on it.
Yeah, if you're like me and you're using the iPhone 13 or above, you've got LiDAR front facing scanning your face.
So
that's a whole nother level of interpreting data coming in, is when you're using light sensing to interpret the blood vessels in your face and interpret every small, tiny perturbation aspect of your eye, your iris. And it's right now, I'm looking right at the camera and the light is hitting. I've got glasses on, but if I didn't have my glass, I'm saying it is doing a scan that, and all that information has already, anyone that gave access to the iPhone and an app can pull in all that information, and it have been for years.
There are people who are very good.
So all that information exists to be trained.
There are people who are very good at reading micro expressions, and they can recognize what's called microaggressions. And now I've never considered myself
right, but there's AI. Yeah, you've got to see some of these new videos that are coming out where the AI, it's mostly for Hollywood, but they're using all these micro understandings of the facial models in order to take out the $1 million dots that they used to use for making movies. So there's a lot of new AI applications coming out. You know, they put on people's faces in order to recognize the different muscle movements, in order to do like Gollum in the Lord of the Rings, where you have these actors.
Yeah, there's FACS, facial action coding system. It recognizes something like 80 different little muscles, and it can indicate which of the 80 ones are active. That's the FACS.
Right. So if you watch Nerfy's near field radiance, what is it called? The light. There's new ways of scanning that the AI, that the algorithms can use in order to reinterpret that back to characters, avatars. It's becoming commonplace now in the filmmaking industry.
Okay, so that the synthetic cartoon avatar can be very nuanced in its facial expressions.
Beyond very nuanced, and it can change the lighting.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's getting so good that the processors can't even keep up with it. Like we need faster computing.
I mean, I would love to have something that can take my live video and generate a cartoonish avatar that's speaking, but makes a much more charismatic presentation than the real me.
Have you clicked the button here on Zoom? Let me see.
I don't think my current hardware will support it. What's the hardware? Which one did you use?
This one here. I just clicked on more, and then it says show avatar.
I think
not very good.
You have the premium version of Zoom, don't you? The paid version.
I'm not sure. I would imagine.
Because I don't even have a more. I've got security, participants, chat, share, polls, record, breakout rooms, reactions, and apps. And I can't even use apps. It says my operating system is too old even for apps. So I have the free version. I don't have what you're doing. I have to have, I think, both.
Okay, well, you see,
I have the paid version and a much more modern hardware.
Okay. Well, I'll just stick out my tongue and then I'll take off the avatar.
Oh yeah. See, I don't have the operating system, the hardware, or the paid version of Zoom to do any of that. I have the free version.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm just saying that the technology is really good right now. Apple's going to put out their AR headset in June. That's the word on the street. And that's going to create the augmented reality boom.
Yeah, I think
where you can see what you're cooking, and
maybe in a few years. I'm still using this 2006 model Mac Pro because it's set up and it's convenient. It's got 2 monitors. I do own newer machines, but they're elsewhere in the house where they're not optimal for me in this room, and I'd have to rearrange all my furniture. So I'm still using the 2006 El Capitan Mac Pro, because it still works. And for what I'm doing, I'm not doing all this fancy stuff that I could do if I were to use the new machines with latest operating systems and paid versions.
Yeah, I would be just like you if I was still just doing web development. I can get away with an older computer, but Now I have to create video and blah, blah, blah. And so I have to use the faster processors.
I just installed an update to Zoom for the first time in a couple of years because the version that I had been using, the version after that didn't even run on El Capitan. And I had to wait until 2 years until they finally released a version of Zoom that does run on El Capitan. And I managed to install it yesterday because the version I had been running on, the Zoom server says you have to update. Well, we won't let you even have a connection anymore with the version that you're using so old. But finally, it turned out that the current version does run on El Capitan after all. All the intermediate ones didn't.
Oh, nice.
You'd launch them, and the little thing would bounce up and down and then go away, so it wouldn't even launch.
Yeah.
And I finally discovered that the newest one does run on El Capitan.
Well, I hope at some point we can schedule a GCC where we actually share our screens again and look at the latest technologies, such as we were using Trello back in the day and a few other things. I introduced Basecamp. There's a bunch of, I think, Notion. And were you guys talking about markup language earlier?
Yes, markdown language.
Markdown. Yeah, Notion uses markdown language.
Probably what I would do is if we wanted to explore the latest and greatest, I would not use this Mac Pro. I would go downstairs to a 2012 iMac that's running Monterey. And I think that may be, though that's probably the most powerful Mac I own. I also have, somebody gave me, they had bought a new PC because it turned out that they didn't know what had failed on. It turned out to be the power supply had failed. So after I figured out the power supply failed, I bought a new power supply for $50. And now I have their relatively recent Windows machine, but I haven't bothered to use it because I'm still using, it's sitting, where I have to plug in all the cables to actually hook it up to a real monitor. So I do have newer machines.
I saw Obsidian. Are you still there, Sam? I saw you put in Obsidian.
He was talking about Obsidian when we first started the session today about using as note-taking and markdown. There's Sam.
Yeah, as a personal knowledge management system. Yeah. And it's actually got a
I'm looking at it right now.
While you're looking at it, I'm going to go take a leak.
Yeah,
tell me again.
I like its simplicity.
It looks interesting. I'm just looking at it now. I haven't seen it before.
Yeah, Notion is trying to do more than Obsidian is.
Are you?
So I find Obsidian more.
Is it anything like the brain?
It can be like the brain. It's got a graphic. It's got a connection model. It's got a idea linking model. The brain is very, very strict and restricted. And the plugins that are available on Obsidian make it, in my opinion, have a higher ceiling, has more potential than the brain, which is interesting because I've been a strong proponent of the brain for quite a while. But Obsidian, based on all markdown documents, so it's not trying to do everything. I had this little rant where I said, when I first saw Macintosh Word or Microsoft Word, I literally was horrified. But because everything in Obsidian and most of these other newer tools now are markdown based, I think that's beginning to become a nice standard, especially since GitHub uses markdown. So I like it as a foundation. And because it's got this plugin architecture, you can do quite a bit with it. So it's got, for example, if you actually connect various different ideas together, and then you're basically trying to figure out how does this idea connect to that idea, there's a plugin that'll show you the path through all of your different notes, how you get from this idea to that idea, and then finally end up in that one. So for bloggers, it turns out to be very, very useful. You could also graphically lay out your ideas as well in a very flexible way that's much more flexible than the brain. So that's why I'm really trying to really learn Obsidian well now. I'm only 2 weeks in.
Oh, cool. I'll check it out. Thank you for that heads up. I'm looking for something that interacts with all of the information on my Mac, like that can scour my hard drive, there's a few apps I used to use, like What is in the Mac for duplicates. But I'm assuming now with all these large language models, I've seen a few where there's smaller amounts of data. I think it's 3,000 or I forgot the amount. But that's what I think the power of these large language models is, to go back through all of your information, the metadata, and make sense out of it.
Yep. Yep.
Like
Yeah.
as a the search spotlight on steroids. Yeah.
That's why I really, believed a long
That
time.
would be, have you also seen some of the chat GPT features to grab the YouTube and summarize a whole YouTube video? You can just put in the URL in Bing
Well,
and it will summarize what was in the video.
that's what I was projecting 6 years ago when I started recording these videos.
Yeah.
I knew that the service would.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's here.
I
It's
know.
here now. We've got it.
Yep. It was
So
only
you're saying
awesome.
if we put this video in
So
to Bing, the URL when it's up, it will tell us what we've been talking about for 2.5 hours?
Yep.
the
And-
chat GPT language model will, yep.
That's gonna be a pretty long conversation. I mean, we talked about a lot of different things in 2.5 hours.
Yeah, but it'll go from the transcript,
Let's-
or some other way, whether it's Whisper or whether it's a YouTube transcript, and it'll try and summarize based on that rather than necessarily going back to the raw bits.
And Bing will do that as a freebie. How fast?
I don't know.
I guess we'll try it. I've got a couple.
I've seen demonstrations of it. I haven't tried it.
I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
A videographer who was planning to make a film, and he interviewed a bunch of people, including me. He never made the film because he never got enough funding. But he took the raw video from the interview, and he put a total of, I think, over 2 hours, 2.5 hours of just me answering his questions up on YouTube. Now, almost nobody's ever looked at it because who cares, right? But I could give either of those. I think one is an hour, one's like an hour and a half. I could give it to Bing and I say, here's the URL of Barry Court answering questions to a journalist, not a journalist, but a filmmaker. What did he say? And I could see, because I know what I said. Did Joshua's turn off to go see Aya?
Yeah. Sorry about that. I have to. Yeah, pretty much that's what happened.
Right. So I'll tell you what,
But
if that works in Bing,
before
I'll
I
try
go,
that this afternoon.
Do you have access to Bing, Sam? Do you have a Microsoft computer? I don't have one.
I do,
don't need
but I don't have much time to actually do that right now. I got so much going on. But
You have to do it on a
staying
weekend.
top
Well-
of it without actually using it a lot.
Do you need to be on a?
I'll try it, and you just need to have the
Bing.
Edge browser.
I have Edge browser is available on Macintosh. There's a
Yeah,
Macintosh.
I'll try and see if I can do it on. I'll see if I can access it from a Mac. I'm just saying I'd like to schedule a time where we go back through an old video or a few old videos and see what it can do in terms of making out of our conversations.
Yeah, that would be an excellent exercise.
Okay, let me know when you guys have time for that.
Well,
That'd be
maybe
great. I just have to run.
Why don't we try it for next Saturday?
Well, if you
That sounds good. If I'm not in the mountains, I'm all for it.
Pick a video, run it through Whisper, run it through Bing, run it through whatever, and let's see what happens.
I'm gonna
All right, sounds good. Let's.
paste the URL into.
Here's what I would do. Pick last week's, in fact, just pick yesterday's video, last Saturday. Or this one, whichever.
Okay.
But let's say pick yesterday, because it's already posted, okay? I don't know if I'm going to get around to posting this one, but pick yesterday's and try it.
Okay. Let me see what I can do.
I'm going to go.
Bye. Okay. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Sam.
You
Cheers.
guys, bye.
Yeah.